GoodMicWork SummerSlam Memories. Holy shit, did this thing get out of hand. Are you ready to hear me talk for the next 3 solid hours? I hope so. I had the brilliant idea a couple of weeks ago that because it was SummerSlam time that I thought it would be cool to come up and just do like a SummerSlam special episode. And I said to myself, I know what I'll do. I'll basically just take a look back at each and every show, just going through some of the memories of the show, what I liked about it, what I didn't like about it, and just take a look at the overall history and legacy of SummerSlam and how it has evolved over the years. I never intended this to be a match-by-match review. I was never going to go through each and everything that took place on each and every show. All this is going to be is just off the top of my head memories of the 26 SummerSlams that we have seen so far. But as I started talking about each of these SummerSlams, this commentary became a lot longer than I intended it to be. So I said, fuck it, we might as well do a marathon commentary. I did this very, very old school. The only thing you're going to see in this video is pictures. I edited about 200 pictures and individually put them up going through the story as I talk about each and every show. A lot of times when I do my big marathon commentaries or my Q&As or special episodes or DVD reviews, I include some footage here or there or maybe a clip or two just to give you a break from my voice. And as usual with my long commentaries, I've hooked you up in the description. Please read the description. Some of you like to sit through these things from start to finish. You're welcome to do that. If you do that, let me know in the comments section below. Otherwise, down in the description, I've got the time codes for each and every SummerSlam year that I talk about. So if you want to skip around, you don't want to hear me ramble on about some of the early days of SummerSlam, the late 80s, early 90s, some of my fondest memories. A lot of you might not have even been born back then, so you don't want to hear me talk about that shit. So go ahead and skip forward to some SummerSlams that you are familiar with. But if you want to just sit back and relax and take a listen to the long history of SummerSlam, then I think this commentary is going to be one that you're really going to enjoy because it's just some freestyle memories. That's all. Feel free to let me know if I left out anything you think that I should have touched on. I know there might be something here or there because I did not go through everything that happened on the show. I just went through what I consider to be the important things that happened on these shows, and a lot of what I said was strictly me going by memory. As I went back and edited this, I was pretty sure I had most of my storylines and my facts straight, but if there's something I need corrected on, just let me know. But just please keep in mind, this is off the top of my head memories from 25, 30 years ago, and I can't be perfect on everything. But it was really fun to go back and do this and take a look at each year and look at the storylines that were going on and taking place in the WWE during those times. And in some cases, how things would change so dramatically from one SummerSlam to the very next year. We talk about a lot of other subjects too, a lot of things that tied into a lot of these SummerSlam matches throughout the years, had other shit that needed to be talked about that went along with it. So we go off subject a few times here or there. I definitely give a lot of strong opinions throughout the whole thing. So I think the whole thing is just a really fun SummerSlam discussion, and I think it's something you guys will really enjoy. If this video gets a good response, I will probably do the same thing for Survivor Series. So let me know what you think about the commentary, what you think about the idea, and if you'd like to see me do more of these in the future, I definitely will. I'm pretty much going to consider this a pay-per-view review, so those of you who have been wondering when my next installment of my pay-per-view and DVD reviews come out, my next one will probably be a DVD. So if I have time, I'll throw one of those at you before August. If not, just hang tight and I will review the Paul Heyman DVD a mere days after it comes out. So that's enough of that. I will end this intro so you guys can start listening to some SummerSlam memories, and don't forget, please read the description for all of those time codes you will need to navigate your way through this commentary, as well as a ton of links down there. Take a look. Don't underestimate my descriptions. There are always great things down there, so check out my other videos, and maybe an Easter egg or two might be laying down there as well. So without further ado, let's start talking about SummerSlam. We'll start with SummerSlam 1988. This was actually the second pay-per-view that I had ever purchased. The first one I had the opportunity to buy was Survivor Series in 1987 on Thanksgiving night, and we actually did not purchase it, so I did not buy that pay-per-view. I had to get the video a few months later. But the first pay-per-view I remember purchasing is WrestleMania 4. That was the first one that was offered on cable via pay-per-view. WrestleMania 3 I attended live, and then before that it was all closed-circuit TV. And then SummerSlam was their brand new pay-per-view. Survivor Series started it out in 1987, and then they went with SummerSlam for the big pay-per-view of the summer, and that began in 1988. And then the following year, in 1989, they would introduce the Royal Rumble on pay-per-view in January. So it seemed like every year the WWE was adding a new pay-per-view: Survivor Series, SummerSlam, Royal Rumble, and then eventually King of the Ring. And I really miss the days of the Big Five pay-per-views, or even the Big Four. It just seemed like matches meant more when pay-per-views were more spaced out. But you're never going to be able to go back to old days, and that's a shame. shame. But let's quickly talk about SummerSlam 1988. There were some very memorable moments on this very first SummerSlam, and this actually made my top 5. Last year around SummerSlam time, I put up my top 5 SummerSlams, which I knew some people would agree and disagree with. A lot of my top 5 tends to be a lot of these earlier SummerSlams, because those are my, most fondest memories, I guess. And by the way, the link to that video is in the description below, and I'm sure I'll put a link up on the screen as well. But I think I had this on my top 5, and I ranked it so high because it was the very first one, and it was meaningful, and it took place at Madison Square Garden on August 29th, 1988. The commentators for this were Gorilla Monsoon and Superstar Billy Graham, which is an interesting combination, but you had Jesse Ventura being the guest referee in the main event. Bobby the Brain Heenan was going to be busy with Andre the Giant and Ted DiBiase. And Vince, I don't know what he was doing. I guess he was in charge of things backstage, so you really didn't have anybody to put on color to go with Gorilla Monsoon. So they put Superstar Billy Graham in there, and it worked out okay, I guess. I didn't have any problem with it, and it was definitely something different. But the pay-per-view really only had 2 memorable things to take place on the show. Number 1 was the awesome Intercontinental title win of the Ultimate Warrior. I always remember this story fondly, because I remember that Brutus Beefcake got flat-out bumped from the match. He was actually set to take on Honky Tonk Man and I think win the Intercontinental title at SummerSlam. They had a long-running feud. They actually wrestled for the title at WrestleMania 4, and I was really surprised that they did not put the belt on Beefcake at WrestleMania 4. I was almost certain that he was going to take the title off of Honky Tonk Man, but then looking back in retrospect, they're already going to be crowning a new World Heavyweight Champion that night, plus Demolition got on the map winning the tag team titles, and most of the time back in those early days, WWE would not have all the titles change hands in the same show. But I always thought Beefcake was going to win the title at WrestleMania 4. So when he got the match with Honky Tonk at SummerSlam, I was like, okay, this is it. They're definitely going to put the belt on Beefcake now. As a matter of fact, I think they had the stipulation that it would be Beefcake's last shot at the title. Well, at the last minute, like literally days before SummerSlam, they decide to run an angle on Superstars or Wrestling Challenge or whatever, where Beefcake gets into a little altercation with Ron Bass. I think Beefcake does something first, interrupts a Ron Bass match, and I remember him cutting Ron Bass's whip with his hedge clippers and cutting it into pieces. And then later on in the show, Beefcake has a match, and Ron Bass does a run-in, or it could have been the week after. I don't remember if it was the same show or if they did this in a span of 2 weeks. Either way, I'm sure it was the same TV taping, but Ron Bass does a run-in, attacks Brutus Beefcake, and then cuts his forehead with the spurs from his cowboy boots. So this knocked out Beefcake from the Intercontinental title match with the Honky Tonk Man at SummerSlam, and Honky Tonk Man comes out to the ring for his match and gets on the mic and says, hey, Beefcake can't be here, I don't give a shit, send anybody out, I don't care who it is. And then the Warriors music hits, the fans go ape shit, he hits the ring, beats the Honky Tonk Man in about 10 seconds, wins the Intercontinental title, and it was an amazing moment for the Ultimate Warrior and for his career, and it really helped launch him, as a major player, and he was huge from that moment on. Lots of filler matches on this pay-per-view. Pay-per-views were a little bit different back then. SummerSlam 1988 was still in the era of, the TV jobber matches, the enhancement matches that you would see on the weekly television in the WWF. So the rest of this pay-per-view featured, full-time roster members competing against each other, but at the same time, they were jobber matches, just, a little bit higher level. For example, you had Bad News Brown versus Ken Patera. This was when Bad News first came into the company. He won the Battle Royal at WrestleMania 4. Ken Patera had only come back to put guys over. This was a jobber match. Bad News was going to win that match. Big Boss Man versus Coco Beware, same thing. Boss Man was new, and Coco was going to job for him. Powers of Pain and the Bolsheviks, same thing. Powers of Pain were brought in to feud with Demolition. The WWE couldn't get their hands on the Road Warriors at the time, so they brought in the Powers of Pain. The British Bulldogs versus the Rougeaus were also on this show. This was one of the last appearances of the Bulldogs. I think they did compete at the Survivor Series, but after that, I don't even remember seeing them at all in 1989. So the Bulldogs were on the way out. Speaking of great tag teams, the Hart Foundation took on Demolition. Demolition was the newly crowned champions from WrestleMania when they beat Strikeforce. They gave the Hart Foundation the title shot, but it really didn't work out. Hart Foundation came away empty-handed, but that's okay because they would get their revenge a couple of years later. Stay tuned for that. And then, of course, the main event, the Mega Powers versus the Mega Bucks. Jesse the Body Ventura has been selected to be the guest referee. They were doing vignettes all on TV and promos, Brother Love show, all that shit with the $1 Million Man trying to pay off Jesse Ventura, which is so silly now when you look back at it, because if this is real life, Ted DiBiase is trying to bribe an official on national television in front of the world. That says a bunch of different things. Number one, you are doing something illegal, you're bribing an official. And number two, you don't have trust in your ability. You're saying to yourself, there's no way that myself and the eighth wonder of the world can defeat the mega powers, therefore we need to pay off a referee to help us. So if you ask me, it was a pussy move on the part of DiBiase and Andre. But can you blame them? I mean, can anybody defeat the mega powers? Holy shit, Randy Macho Man Savage and Hulk Hogan in 1988 together as a unit, they were fucking unstoppable. They were as superhero can be. And back then at these early pay-per-views, they could get away with that. You could get away with having a tag team match with no title up for grabs in the main event. They did this at the first 2 SummerSlams. And the match was good and memorable. You know, those were the glory days. You know, the days of Hogan and Andre and Savage. You know, those were fun times in the WWE. And of course, Elizabeth, who had been so quiet and so shy for all of her career, never said shit, never did anything, barely, you know, even cracked a smile half the time. All of a sudden, she gets a little sassy and jumps up on the ring apron and just pulls her skirt off, distracting DiBiase and Andre the Giant, allowing Hogan and Savage to jump him from behind, you know, beat the crap out of him, and finally Hogan hits the leg drop and Savage hits the elbow on DiBiase, and they get the pin for the victory, and that's how the show goes off the air. The Mega Powers celebrating, and the little tiny tease, they started it right at SummerSlam, where they just basically planted the seed of a future feud between Savage and Hogan, when I think Hogan grabbed Elizabeth or something like that, and Savage saw it, took it out of context, and, you know, kind of just raised an eyebrow to it and looked a little bit suspicious of Hogan. They would do the same thing at Survivor Series a couple of months later, except they elevated it a couple notches, and Savage was noticeably pissed off at Hogan. But anyway, I spent way too much time talking about the first SummerSlam. We need to speed this up. Let's talk about SummerSlam in 1989. A lot of the same things happen on this show. In between the 2 major things that did take place, you know, there were a lot of filler matches on this again. Matches like Mr. Perfect and the Red Rooster, Dusty Rhodes and the Honky Tonk Man, Hercules and Greg the Hammer Valentine, Jimmy Snuka and Ted DiBiase. Lots of tag team matches on this pay-per-view as well. 6-man tag team matches specifically. There were 2 different 6-man tags on this pay-per-view. One of them was the Rockers and Tito Santana versus the Rougeaus and Rick Martel. Now, Tito and Martel had just split up. They were Strikeforce at WrestleMania 5 and did the angle where Martel turned on Tito. The other interesting 6-man tag that took place was Demolition, who had just lost the tag team titles to the Brainbusters just, I think, a week or 2 prior to this on Saturday night's main event. They teamed up with Hacksaw Jim Duggan to take on, get this, the Twin Towers, Big Boss Man and Akeem, formerly One Man Gang, and their partner, fucking Andre the Giant. It's like a 3,000-pound tag team. And they lost. Demolition and Hacksaw beat them. It was hilarious. This pay-per-view did contain a dream match for me. I was always a big Four Horsemen fan. I was always a big Tully and Arn fan. And like I said, just a couple of weeks prior to this, Brainbusters won the tag team titles from Demolition on Saturday night's main event. But since they signed the contract with the Hearts before they won the title, this match was not for the tag team title. But I really didn't care. Just to see a great team like the Hart Foundation in the ring with a great team like Tully and Arn, that was awesome, and that was new. I actually think they might have worked, you know, some house shows or maybe even some TV shows prior to this possibly, but this was the first match that I remember, and it was a pay-per-view match. And as a young wrestling fan at the time, you know, being a fan of the NWA and WWF, you know, it was awesome to see this match. And the Hart Foundation, unfortunately, comes up short again. But like I said, their time's coming. Stay tuned. The Ultimate Warrior won the Intercontinental title again. He loves to do that at SummerSlam. It's like his favorite. This time he's got the rematch with Rick Rude from WrestleMania 5, where Rude beat him for the title with help from Bobby the Brain Heenan. This was the rematch taking place at SummerSlam, and I like this match. It had a great vibe to it. I think fans were itching for the Warrior to get the title back. You know, he was still super over, and Rick Rude did such an amazing job working with the Warrior. I thought he was a great opponent for the Warrior because he could really bump around well. Rude was really light on his feet, and Rick Rude could even sell the press slam really well. And Rude was a little bit lighter, and he was athletic and agile, and he could help the Warrior get him up there. You know, it's not like where Warrior's trying to pick up Haku and pick him up over his head. You know, Rude made it much easier. He made the Warrior's moves look good because, you know, we got to be honest, Ultimate Warrior, you know, he was shit in the ring. I don't have anything against him anymore. I was devastated and just completely shocked when he died. And he is an icon in the business for sure, and he deserves to be in the Hall of Fame, but that doesn't take away from the fact that he just sometimes didn't know what the fuck he was doing out there, and that was obvious. And Rick Rude really helped to make it look like Warrior did, in fact, know what he was doing out there. And the finish of the match was really funny. You know, Roddy Piper had also just started a feud with Rick Rude as well. They had started some heat with each other on Primetime Wrestling. So Roddy Piper actually comes out to ringside during the match and for some reason just lifts his kilt up, you know, and shows Rick Rude his bare ass. That was enough, I guess. Forget the fact that these guys probably shower together or see each other in the shower every single night on the road. Somehow Piper showing Rick Rude his ass is enough to distract him enough for the Warrior to jump him from behind, hit him with his tackles, his clothesline, his press slam, his splash, and the 1-2-3 count. And the Ultimate Warrior won back the Intercontinental title. The place went nuts. I mean, Warrior was huge. He would hold that belt, you know, all the way up until he would face Hogan at WrestleMania, you know, so the next year. So Warrior, you know, he was on top of the world, and that was awesome. I just remember Schiavone going crazy, and incidentally, the commentators for this year was Tony Schiavone and Jesse the Body Ventura, and it was one of the very few Tony Schiavone appearances in the WWE. I think he was there for maybe just a year, and it was all during 1989. I think he appeared at WrestleMania 5. The main event, of course, was ridiculous. Another tag team match involving Hulk Hogan. This time, the Mega Powers have split up. They're on opposite sides this year. And it's Hogan and Beefcake taking on Macho Man, Randy Savage, and Zeus. Yes, fucking Zeus. This was during that terrible movie that the WWE had helped produce, No Holds Barred, starring Hulk Hogan. And it was kind of weird how they made the character from the movie come into wrestling to challenge Hulk Hogan. You know, I actually thought for a minute they might actually put the belt on Zeus because Zeus put Hogan over in the movie. But I actually think the whole thing was done just to help promote the movie, and that's it. I mean, there's really no other reason to bring Zeus in to feud with Hogan unless they're really trying hard to sell No Holds Barred. Because otherwise, you got a whole roster of guys, you got a whole roster of heels, and a bunch of monsters that you can team with Randy Savage to take on Hogan. But they brought in Zeus for the next big bad mega heel to put in front of Hulk Hogan for him to defeat, and at the same time, it helped co-promote the movie, and it was a two birds, one stone thing. Zeus was super over at first. Zeus was demolishing everybody he came into contact with. People were legitimately scared of Zeus, especially if he'd attack a jobber or he attacked Beefcake or something like that. He seemed to be impervious to pain. He wasn't selling punches. He wasn't selling chair shots. He wasn't selling anything. But the finish of the match sees Hogan pick up Sherry's purse, which is a loaded purse. Apparently there's a brick in it. And by the way, Sherry is in the corner of Macho Man and Zeus, and Elizabeth is actually in the corner of Beefcake and Hogan. But Hogan picks up the purse and smashes Zeus in the face with it, allowing him to pick him up and body slam him, hitting Zeus with the leg drop and getting the pin on Zeus. But again, we're looking at a SummerSlam that puts a tag team match as their main event, but that would all change the year after this. Now it's time for my favorite SummerSlam, SummerSlam 1990. This was number 1 on my top 5 video that I did last year. I have such fond personal memories of this particular SummerSlam. I just remember the night well, vividly. I ordered it on pay-per-view. It was just such a hot, humid, balmy summer night down in the southeast. The atmosphere in the Philadelphia Spectrum that night sort of mirrored the same sort of summer heat that I was feeling in my own life. You know, the Spectrum was a smaller building. The fans were really jam-packed in there to the rafters, as Gorilla Monsoon would say. And just the emotion and the excitement and the energy in the building felt very, very real. And not to mention, I had a couple of my favorite matches in SummerSlam history, and a few of the memorable moments that took place on the show. There was yet another Intercontinental title change at the SummerSlam. That makes 3 in a row so far. This time we have Intercontinental Champion Mr. Perfect, who won the belt in a tournament after the Ultimate Warrior had to surrender the title after he beat Hogan at WrestleMania 6. So putting the Intercontinental title back on a good wrestler like Mr. Perfect, like it had previously been on with, you know, Ricky Steamboat and Randy Savage and Tito Santana and Greg Valentine, it was nice to see, you know, a guy like Curt Hennig hold the title because Warrior and Honky Tonk Man had combined held that thing for like fucking 3 years. And then Kerry Von Erich gets signed by the WWE. He finally comes into the WWE. He was a huge star. The Von Erich family, we all know how fucked up they are. But Kerry, I think, had the most superstar potential of all of the Von Erichs, and they finally brought him in. And for some reason, unlike a tag team that we're going to talk about in a little while, the WWE hotshots the whole thing and puts the belt on Kerry Von Erich right away. They did the storyline on TV where he came out and challenged Mr. Perfect about a week before SummerSlam, and Perfect, you know, arrogantly accepts the challenge, and they ran the storyline that, he's unprepared. He accepted a challenge from, somebody he knows nothing about. Well, that's bullshit, and that's how stupid Vince McMahon is. The whole time on TV, they're trying to play it off like nobody has ever seen Kerry Von Erich. You're like, yeah, right, Vince. Nobody watches WCCW. Nobody has any clue about the NWA or any of the other territories that are still actually a little bit out there. The fact that this guy is a former fucking NWA champion. He beat Ric Flair in front of a huge crowd at Texas Stadium for the title with the backslide. It's one of the biggest memories I have in pro wrestling, and you're going to sit there and act like none of us know who the fuck this guy is? That is the type of arrogance that has always annoyed me about Vince McMahon and the WWE. They're so ingrained in their own little world, as well they should be. I really admire that they concentrate on themselves and they don't worry too much about outside stuff, but you got to pay a little bit of attention. And the fact that all the higher-ups in the WWE doesn't think that the fans have any sort of concept of professional wrestling outside of the WWE is highly irritating to me. And not to mention, given Curt Hennig's track record, where he's been, this match to me was cool because it was a former AWA champion wrestling a former NWA champion. And that match was taking place in a WWE ring for a WWE title. That was pretty amazing shit if you ask me. But the WWE doesn't play off that at all. They make it seem like Kerry Von Erich is some completely new guy, a fucking rookie who's been in the business for 2 weeks, and Curt Hennig knows nothing about him. He accepts a challenge without any preparation or any notice, and he gets caught off guard, and Kerry Von Erich beats him for the Intercontinental title, and they put the belt on the Texas Tornado because that's his name. Now, on one hand, I had no problem with this because the Intercontinental title looked good on Kerry Von Erich, and he was another big star coming into the company. I saw potential for him and Warrior in the future. That was my initial thought when I saw Von Erich come in. I said to myself, I'm like, wow, what if they do a babyface match at WrestleMania 7 with Von Erich and Warrior? My mind was kind of turning that way when I saw Kerry Von Erich come in. But he had a lot of problems. He wasn't going to be able to be the guy to carry the torch, but Vince really wanted to give him a chance, and I think that's why they put the IC belt on him so quick. And he actually didn't hold it very long. Mr. Perfect took it back off of him, I think on a TV taping just a couple of months later. But anyway, some of us agree and disagree with Kerry Von Erich's IC title win that night, but I still think regardless, it was a memorable moment. The crowd popped huge for it. I think it was the second match on the card. And it got a great reaction. The Texas Tornado was over, and I even liked his theme music. Go back and listen to the Texas Tornado's theme music from WWF 1990. It was pretty good. Probably one of my top 3 favorite matches in SummerSlam history was Demolition versus the Hart Foundation. 2 out of 3 falls for the tag team titles. These two teams wrestled at the first SummerSlam. Demolition is back to being a heel team again, and they've added a third member, Crush. I think what was happening is Axe, Bill Eadie, was going to be leaving the company, and they were just going to slowly phase out Axe and just make the team Smash and Crush. I think the reason they mainly turned Demolition heel is because the WWE signed the Road Warriors, finally. Demolition was the team that the WWE created because they couldn't get the Road Warriors. The Powers of Pain were the team that they brought in a couple of years before because they couldn't get the Road Warriors. Now the Road Warriors are finally here. And unlike with Kerry Von Erich, they decided to take their fucking time with the Road Warriors winning their tag team titles. That would be coming at the next SummerSlam. But the Road Warriors come on the scene, Legion of Doom, right after WrestleMania 6, I believe. Right after Demolition wins their third title by defeating the Colossal Connection, the Road Warriors come in, Demolition turns heel, and the Hart Foundation gets the title shot at SummerSlam. This is a 2 out of 3 falls match, and the rules state that only 2 members of Demolition can be at ringside. So the 2 team members they use are Smash and Crush because the WWE is wanting to, make this the new Demolition team as they slowly wean off Bill Eadie. But what's funny to me, it's just interesting how you can just bring a third guy onto the team and he's a tag team champion. Crush never won that belt. He came in and had the title around his waist without ever winning it. But hey, it's wrestling. Sometimes shit doesn't make sense. The match itself was awesome. Demolition and the Hearts worked well together, and Demolition was a good team, The WWE, it was kind of their version of the Road Warriors. They were like a knockoff version of them. But I'll tell you what, they were every damn bit as good in the ring. Barry Darsow and Bill Eadie are damn fine workers. And then when you add Crush into the mix, who at the time was, a rookie, he was inexperienced, but he was still big and relatively agile, and he did well. And the finish of the match was spectacular. The falls were tied up 1-1. Axe had come down to the ring and was hiding under the ring and actually got involved in the match a couple of times, completely fresh, beating the absolute piss out of Bret Hart. And him and Smash were kind of, trading places throughout the match while they would both take turns hiding under the ring. Finally, the Road Warriors do a run in. They come down to the ring just as Demolition is about to put the nail in the coffin on the Hart Foundation. They come out and drag Axe out from under the ring. I think Hawk jumps up on the ring apron and knocks off Crush, who's about to deliver the demolition elbow to one of the Harts, and then the Harts do a little, schoolboy roll-up on Crush to win the third fall and win the tag team titles, and the building exploded. It was one of my favorite moments in SummerSlam. By this point, Bret Hart had already become my favorite wrestler. I really started liking Bret Hart when they split up the Hart Foundation the first time, so I was really happy for Bret Hart, and I was really happy to see the Hart Foundation win the titles as a babyface team, completely coming full circle. It was awesome for the legacy of the team. This was kind of one of those double main event SummerSlams because Hogan had just dropped the belt to the Warrior at WrestleMania. Well, he's now back feuding with the Earthquake, and he's going to have a match with Earthquake on the pay-per-view. It was the first time in a long time that Hulk Hogan wrestled on a major show and he was not the main event. Every big pay-per-view up until this point, he was the last match, or at least involved in the last match. So he's going to have his match first with the Earthquake. This was the latest big bad heel that the WWE decided to put in front of Hogan and just give him somebody, a big monster to feud with. The only thing I didn't like about the angle is they completely rehashed the Big Boss Man angle that they did the year before. Or maybe it was about 2 years before, where Boss Man confronted Hogan on the Brother Love show. It led to a fight. Hogan got the crap kicked out of him. The fans had tears in their eyes as the medical staff carted off Hulk Hogan's carcass into the back, and it led to a big series of matches with the Boss Man. They did the exact same thing with the Earthquake. Same scenario, same type of interview. Earthquake jumps Hogan, beats the crap out of him. Fans are freaked out. It puts Hulk Hogan on the shelf, which basically means he's just taking time off. He's not going to work. And the match was not even a typical Hogan match. He won the match via countout. So it was interesting that he didn't hit Earthquake with the 3 punches and the big boot and the leg drop to get the victory, but I think the reason they did this and did a countout victory is so they could sell out more shows together now that Hogan was back. And the main event was also a pretty good match. I mean, the Ultimate Warrior and Rick Rude are at it again. This time they're wrestling for the WWE title, and it's a cage match. I talked extensively about this match in my top 5 video last year, so I'm not going to get into too much depth about it, but 2 things I remember specifically is that Ravishing Rick Rude had the Ultimate Warrior beat twice during this match, and Roddy Piper seemed like he was venting and voicing a lot of the frustrations that a lot of the locker room must have had with the Ultimate Warrior at the time, because Roddy Piper, who's a babyface, is on commentary completely burying the WWE champion right in front of Vince McMahon. Roddy Piper was basically, putting down the Ultimate Warrior and making fun of him throughout the match and making fun of his inexperience and that he doesn't know what the fuck he's doing and his stupid outfit and how dumb he looks. Don't forget, Roddy Piper was feuding with Rick Rude. This is the same Roddy Piper, like I talked about in the SummerSlam 1989, that interfered in the Rude Warrior match the year prior and helped Warrior win the Intercontinental title. Now it's 1 year later, the same 2 guys are in the ring, Piper's on commentary, and he's completely trashing the Warrior. So to me, that was really interesting. But I actually really liked this match. I thought it was good for the Warrior to be in a match like this, a violent match. Warrior, got some color in this match as well, so did Rude. You hadn't seen Warrior in this type of situation yet, and it was a bright spot for me when I think of the Ultimate Warrior's career, because I remember so fondly watching this pay-per-view live as it happened on that hot summer night, and I just loved, just about every match on the show. And this pay-per-view, like the first 2 SummerSlams, had their share of filler matches as well. I think you had Tito Santana and the Warlord, you had the Orient Express and Duggan and Volkov, you had Bad News Brown and Jake the Snake Roberts with Harlem Sewer Rats involved. Big Boss Man was the referee in that match. It's interesting that Boss Man did double duty at this pay-per-view and still didn't compete in a match. He was the referee in one, and he was the corner man in another. And for you Shawn Michaels fans out there, there's a little bit of history with Shawn in this too. The Rockers opened the pay-per-view. They were the first match on the card against Power and Glory, if you remember that team, Paul Roma and Hercules. And what had happened is that Shawn had blown out his knee. I think he had torn his ACL or something pretty bad, and he was going to need surgery on the knee. So he went out and actually ran the angle. He actually went out to the ring with Marty. Go back and watch the tape. As the Rockers are making their ring entrance, Shawn is noticeably limping, and as soon as he gets to the ringside area, I think one of the Power and Glory members jump out of the ring. It must have been Hercules, and nail Shawn right in his knee with the chain that Hercules wears around his neck. And this was very similar with what they did with the British Bulldogs and the Hart Foundation years ago. I think in 1987, when the Harts won the tag team titles for the first time, Dynamite had gotten injured prior to the match as well. And they did the angle where as soon as the Bulldogs came out to the ring, Dynamite gets hit with a megaphone and he's completely incapacitated throughout the whole match. And it's a handicap match, the Harts versus Davey Boy Smith, and they eventually beat him and win the tag team titles with help from Danny Davis as well. So this was kind of like that. Shawn is now on the outside of the ring, writhing in pain. He's unable to compete. Marty's in there all by himself against two guys, puts up a great fight, almost wins the match, but finally Power and Glory are able to beat him with their pretty kick-ass finisher that they had at the time. I have to give it to them. I believe it was something where Hercules would superplex the guy off the rope, and then Paul Roma would time a top rope splash with it and land on the guy just as he's hitting the mat. And if you timed it right, it looked fantastic. We've seen a lot of finishers sort of like that now in recent years, but for this time, 25 years ago almost, that was a pretty good move. All in all, awesome pay-per-view and easily my favorite SummerSlam of all time. SummerSlam 1991 I thought was a decent show, but not nearly as great as 1990, but I think it did contain my favorite SummerSlam match of all time. There's been a lot. It's debatable. I know I'm biased towards Bret Hart, but the match he had that night with Curt Hennig for the Intercontinental title was one of my favorite matches of all time. Interesting story behind it because Curt Hennig was injured. His back was all fucked up and he was going to drop the belt to Bret on his way out, and he wanted to have a good match for Bret because Bret, during his first split with Jim Neidhart, was basically used to put over Curt at all the house shows. So this was Curt's way of giving back after Bret had helped make Mr. Perfect who he was. Perfect wanted to give back. I thought it was just such an awesome thing for Curt Hennig to do. And if you go back and watch the match, it's really hard to tell that Curt Hennig is hurt at all. Normally, when you have a situation like this, the match is not going to be as good as it could be, and I think it was one of their best matches they've ever had. I also really liked their King of the Ring match they had as well in 1993. I might have even liked that match a tiny bit more than the SummerSlam one, but as far as SummerSlam goes, this was my favorite match of all time. The other title change that took place, well, actually, there were two other title changes on this pay-per-view, but the one other title change, the major one, is what I alluded to earlier on in SummerSlam 1990. The Legion of Doom, the WWE takes a full year. They take over a year to finally put the belts on the Road Warriors. They gave the Hart Foundation the belt first in a good, long, healthy run with the Hart Foundation all the way up until WrestleMania 7, where they were defeated by the Nasty Boys. Now, to me, it would have been so much better because Demolition had been feuding with LOD throughout the rest of that year after they interfered in the SummerSlam 1990 match. They feuded for a while. That feud was over. And so LOD gets the match with Power and Glory at WrestleMania 7. If you ask me, you should have had a babyface match. Road Warriors versus the Hart Foundation, and the Harts can put them over because they were going to split up the Harts again and give Bret a run with the IC title. So they had him lose to the Nasty Boys, which is fine. You got to take the belts off of them. But I think the Road Warriors versus the Harts would have drawn so much better for WrestleMania 7. This must have had something to do with them signing the Nasty Boys and bringing them in, and maybe giving them the title and giving them a run with the belts was promised to them when they signed, and they thought they would make a good heel team, a good transitional team to pass the belts off between the Harts and the Road Warriors. But, if you ask me, you should have just gone with the match, Harts versus LOD. But they get some sort of, I think, like no-holds-barred match or some Falls Count Anywhere match. I don't even remember the stipulation, but I think there were a few less rules than normal in this match between the Nasty Boys and LOD. And, of course, I don't think there was a person in that building that night that expected LOD to lose, and the Road Warriors finally win the WWE Tag Team titles, and that crowd popped hard. The fans were treated to some great shit in this SummerSlam. 2 years in a row, Tag Team titles and Intercontinental title changes hands. The other title change that I was alluding to was actually one of the only bright spots in poor Virgil's career. He had a match with the $1 Million Man for the $1 Million belt. Roddy Piper had befriended Virgil. They ran the angle earlier that year at the Royal Rumble and then at WrestleMania, and now Virgil gets the title shot against the $1 Million Man. Hot Rod's on commentary for this. The commentating, by the way, was great. It was a three-man team of Gorilla, Bobby, and Roddy Piper. Fucking unbelievable shit. Go back and listen, to these guys bicker back and forth. Bobby the Brain Heenan getting on Roddy Piper's case. I think actually during the Bret Hart Perfect match, Piper was, just getting berated by Bobby Heenan. It was funny. Bobby Heenan was winning the war, but Virgil actually winds up beating the $1 Million Man. The crowd goes nuts. This SummerSlam was back at Madison Square Garden, by the way. The crowd goes ape shit. Virgil stands there in the ring on a big pay-per-view in the WWE winning a title belt, even though it was just the $1 Million belt. I guess technically it was still a title win for him. And you were almost happy for him. It's a shame that it didn't work out for Virgil. But $1 Million Man put him over that night, gave him his little gold diamond belt to run with for a couple of months. And Piper was hysterical on commentary, cheering on Virgil, and I actually thought it was a decent match, to be honest with you. This was also the year of the jailhouse match. Remember that, between the Big Boss Man and the Mountie? The Mountie lost the match and had to get carted off to jail to spend the night there for one night. That was the stipulation. The loser had to spend a night in jail. And it was pretty funny because I think throughout SummerSlam, as soon as the match was over and then later on, a couple of matches later, they were taking you to the jail and watching the Mountie getting fingerprinted, and he's freaking out. I mean, he's fucking losing it. It was absolutely hilarious. And it was a really good, comedic segment of the pay-per-view, I thought. Mountie did a good job freaking out in jail. They went back to this tag team shit for the main event, so now you got 3 out of your first 4 SummerSlams have tag team matches as the main event. But this one is the super team of Hulk Hogan and the Ultimate Warrior versus the Triangle of Terror, Sergeant Slaughter, General Adnan, and Colonel Mustafa, who was the Iron Sheik. So this was a 3-on-2 handicap match main event, and the special guest referee for this thing is Sid Justice. Now, this is the SummerSlam where we've heard the infamous story how supposedly the Ultimate Warrior held up Vince McMahon for a bunch of money, says, I'm not going to go out there and compete tonight in the main event unless you pay me X amount of dollars. There's conflicting reports on both sides. Bottom line is something took place that evening that basically caused the Warrior to leave the WWF that night. And it's weird when you go back and look at it, because right before this, a week before on television, they started the feud with Jake the Snake Roberts and the Ultimate Warrior. Long story short, The Undertaker attacked the Ultimate Warrior on the Funeral Parlor show, which was like the New Brother Love show, stuffed the Ultimate Warrior in the casket. It took him forever to get him out of there. Warrior had all sorts of psychological problems. He's now deathly afraid of death and caskets and all that shit. Jake the Snake Roberts volunteers his services to help the Warrior deal with these issues. And they do these really funny, hokey weekly vignettes where Jake the Snake Roberts takes the Warrior to a graveyard or a couple other places and, basically makes him stare death in the face to overcome this fear. They get to the final segment of this, which is about a week before SummerSlam. Now remember, Warrior's going in there in a match with Hogan against Slaughter and Adnan and Mustafa. It has nothing to do with Jake Roberts or anything like that. So they're in some dark cave somewhere, and Jake Roberts sends the Ultimate Warrior into this room where he opens up a box, and there's a cobra there. It bites the Ultimate Warrior. It's so ridiculous. He's writhing in pain. He falls to the ground, and then you see this big pair of gray boots standing next to him. And you see Jake Roberts says, the man in black. And it was Jake the Snake Roberts' heel turn. He turns on the Ultimate Warrior, attacks him with a fucking cobra with the help of the Undertaker. Turns out Undertaker and Jake were in cahoots the whole time to help, destroy the Ultimate Warrior. And this was going to lead to a big feud between Warrior and Jake. And he's already got one going on with Undertaker. So, this is going to be a big deal for Jake Roberts. It's a big heel turn for him. He was always a good scumbag heel when he first came into the company. So they're kind of going back with that. And I was excited for it. But then you fast forward a week later to SummerSlam, Warrior's involved in this match. You didn't even know if he was going to be there because he was bitten by a snake, a cobra, so you didn't know if Warrior was even going to make the match. But he shows up in the match, and he actually just runs out of the ring during the match somehow. When things start breaking down, I think he just chases away Adnan or Mustafa or something like that, leaving Hogan and Slaughter in the ring all by themselves, and Hogan ends up beating him, and Sid counts the 1, 2, 3, and I think even Hogan calls out Sid at the end of the match to come out there and pose with him. It was a funny few months in the WWE. Plans were changing a lot. They couldn't decide what they were doing, which way they were going, and the Warrior situation just added more confusion to it because that night, whatever happened, whatever transpired between Warrior and Vince McMahon, he was out of the WWE. Which brings up an interesting thought about what was technically the main event of this SummerSlam, and that is a wedding. Savage had the retirement match with the Ultimate Warrior at WrestleMania 7. Sherry is pissed off that he lost, turned on him at the end of the match. Elizabeth, who's sitting in the crowd, jumps over the railing, runs in the ring, and throws Sherry out of the ring, reuniting her with Macho Man. They have the tearful reunion and embrace, and the crowd is in tears, and it's fucking emotional, and it's crazy. And then they put Savage on commentary on TV after that, where he's now kind of an in-between. He's slowly turning babyface. He's kind of still a heel when he starts doing commentary, but he starts lightening up on that, and with a couple of months, Savage is back to being a face again. He proposes to Elizabeth on TV and says that they should get married at SummerSlam. I don't know why they chose to go with a fucking wedding as the main event at a pay-per-view like this. It was just one of those things, one of those weird things they did, especially when Savage and Liz were already married, and they went through with it basically just to get to the reception. And this is what's interesting about it, because at the reception, which they're still filming at the pay-per-view, it's on the VHS tape and everything, they're in some sort of banquet hall with all of their friends, and they're opening up presents, and Elizabeth opens one up, and there's a cobra in there. It scares the shit out of her. She falls down. She's screaming. And then The Undertaker and Jake Roberts crash the ceremony and hit Macho Man over the head with a chair. Jake grabs the snake and starts taunting Elizabeth with it, just tormenting her. She's fucking losing her mind. Everybody's screaming. Everybody's freaking out. And it was like, now Jake is starting a feud with Savage. He had just started one with Warrior. You know, it almost seemed like the WWE knew the Ultimate Warrior was going to leave or something, because they had a plan B in place. You know, the very same night that this holdup takes place, supposedly, between Vince and Warrior leaves the company, they immediately put Jake and The Undertaker right into a different feud with Macho Man instead. So I guess it's just a big coincidence. That must have been what they had planned all along. Maybe what they planned to do is have The Undertaker and Jake attack Warrior the way they did, and then attack Macho Man, and then ironically have the Ultimate Warrior and Macho Man join forces, which they ended up doing a year later when Warrior came back. But maybe that was their original plan, was to have these two guys that just got done wrestling each other with their careers on the line at WrestleMania. Now they're joining forces to fight this common force, these two evil bastards that have attacked both of them. And maybe they were looking to, you know, give us another super team like we had with Savage and Hogan, like we had with Warrior and Hogan, and now Savage and Warrior. So that's the only thing I can think of, but at least with the Warrior leaving, it completely didn't fuck over Jake Roberts, because he went into a very intense feud with Macho Man. And that was pretty good shit. And Jake would actually leave the WWE shortly after this. He was only there. His heel run didn't last long. It was pretty much done after WrestleMania 8 when he faced The Undertaker. And he actually left and went down to WCW. Moving on to SummerSlam 1992. This one was a big deal. Wembley Stadium in the UK, 80,000 people. Huge for the WWE to take this pay-per-view overseas. As a matter of fact, considering the success that this SummerSlam had over there, I'm surprised that they've never gone back, you know, for a major pay-per-view in that building. But there was really only two matches, along with the sheer size of this pay-per-view, that was really anything memorable on this show. And of course, number one was the main event, Bret the Hitman Hart versus the British Bulldog for the Intercontinental title. Very cool that the WWE put the Intercontinental title in the main event. They had the British Bulldog, hometown boy. They knew he was going to be hugely over, you know, in front of his home country like that. And they're also big fans of Bret Hart, because Bret Hart is a huge international star. And, you know, that was cool of the WWE to recognize. And, I mean, according to Bret Hart in his book and a lot of other interviews, he claims a lot of this was his idea, that he approached them and said, hey, why don't you put me and Davey in the main event of this big Wembley Stadium SummerSlam? We can have the best match on the card. I'll put him over, drop the belt to him. It can make for a great moment. And they took him up on it, apparently, and went with the idea. And it was one of the greatest matches in SummerSlam history. Not one of my favorites of all time. Still an awesome match. Don't get me wrong. I love the match. But it definitely wasn't my favorite Bret Hart match, even though I really did enjoy it. And the streak of the Intercontinental title changing hands at SummerSlam continues. The IC title changed hands in the first 5 SummerSlams. Pretty cool. And also, the second half of the main event for the WWE World title took place in the middle of the card between Randy Savage and the Ultimate Warrior. I've talked about this match before, too, that it was interesting that just about a year and a half prior to this, they were wrestling in a career match at WrestleMania 7. Randy Savage actually cost the Ultimate Warrior the title in his match against Sergeant Slaughter at the Royal Rumble. There was some really bad blood in that feud. And here it is, a mere year and a half later, they are now both baby faces, and they're wrestling in a babyface match, and Ric Flair and Mr. Perfect were all in the middle of this thing. The match actually ended, I think, in a DQ or a countout, and it saw Ric Flair and Mr. Perfect beating the shit out of both Randy Savage and the Ultimate Warrior, and they actually had to join forces to fight him off. You know, they had the show of respect at the end of the match. The Warrior put the belt on Savage, and it was interesting how, after all that they had been through with their intense feud, that they're actually on the same page fighting a common enemy. All in all, this SummerSlam was pretty good, but I am thinking that it wasn't one of my favorites, looking back now. On my last year's top 5 video, I think I put this somewhere in the top 5. I think I gave it a spot on the top 5 just because of the sheer size of it. But really, when I look back at the card, I mean, other than the great main event between Bret and Bulldog, not a whole hell of a lot happened on the show. So if I had to do it again, I would probably take this SummerSlam off of my top 5 and replace it with another one. I would not replace it with SummerSlam 1993, which is what we're up to next. Oh, the fucking Lex Express. You guys remember this? Summer of 1993, 21 years ago, Yokozuna had beat Hulk Hogan at the King of the Ring for the title, and they were going to do the big celebration on the deck of the USS Intrepid on July 4th. They were going to put a ring in there. Yokozuna was going to do a body slam challenge or celebration combination type of thing where he was going to invite anybody from America to come try to body slam him. So they brought everybody out there, all the WWE wrestlers, Crush, Macho Man, the Steiner, wrestlers, some athletes, some celebrities. Everybody came out there and tried to body slam Yokozuna. And then at the very end, a helicopter lands, and out walks the narcissist, Lex Luger, who's a huge heel in the WWE. All of a sudden, he's wearing an American flag shirt. He gets in the ring, body slams Yokozuna, and sets up the big match at SummerSlam. Lots of behind-the-scenes controversy in this match, too. Apparently, the early idea for this year's SummerSlam was going to be Hulk Hogan defending the title against Bret Hart. Bret Hart swears up and down in his book and multiple other places that this match was set to happen. They even did a photo shoot with Hogan and Bret doing a little tug-of-war with the title belt to be put on the cover of the WWE magazine. And because of whatever backstage shit, Hogan being an asshole, whatever, he just didn't want to work with Bret. Whatever the hell happened, the match didn't end up taking place. Hogan dropped the title to Yokozuna and left the WWE, and Vince McMahon basically just thought, hey, I'll create another Hogan. If you ask me, what they did with Lex Luger back in 1993 was every bit as bad as what they did with the new Diesel and new Razor Ramon. It was so painfully obvious what they were trying to do. They were trying to make a born-again Hulk Hogan. And I think it got over on the same level that Hogan did maybe at first. Fans seemed to be behind Lex Luger. They were trying so hard, but not me. I knew who Lex Luger was. I knew where he came from. I knew his history, his track record. It just wasn't working for me. Lex was a tiny bit smaller than Hogan, maybe a little bit less of a worker, and he had a lot less of the charisma than Hogan did. So if you ask me, he was an imposter Hogan. And I was happy that they decided not to put the belt on him, because the way it was looking, you thought for sure Lex Luger was going to win the title at SummerSlam. And I think the WWE wanted to give it a little bit more time, and I think the original plan was for Lex to wind up winning it at WrestleMania 10, this great moment, the dawning of a new generation. He was going to be the WWE's new guy. And luckily, it didn't work out, and WWE went with Bret instead. I don't think I could have handled Lex Luger, being the American WWE champion, American flag, kissing the babies. We just got done seeing that shit for 9 years. Imagine with John Cena. Imagine when John Cena leaves, or if John Cena retires, the next big star in the WWE comes out wearing a fluorescent green shirt and a bright red hat and neon wristbands and fucking Reebok pumps and jean shorts. You're going to fucking go out of your mind. That's what I felt like I went through in 1993 when Hogan left and finally were rid of this motherfucker, and then in they bring Luger to do the exact same fucking gimmick. So they went with the finish where Luger nails Yoko with his loaded forearm, causing him to fall out of the ring and get counted out. So it was kind of cool. The WWE was able to give Lex Luger the big moment, the celebration, the balloons, but not give him the title, because back then it was still early on enough in the pay-per-view days where you can get away with shit like this. They hadn't had a world title change at a SummerSlam yet. It was all the Intercontinental title. And by the way, the streak ends at this SummerSlam. Finally, the IC title does not change hands, and Shawn Michaels defends his title against Mr. Perfect, and Diesel helps Shawn win via, I think, countout. I think Diesel... I can't remember if it was count out or Shawn pinned him, but I know Diesel knocked out Mr. Perfect. And Shawn either pinned him or Perfect got counted out. I can't remember. But Shawn retains the title, and the streak is over. The first 5 SummerSlams, we had a title change, and no more. This pay-per-view also had the token 6-man tag team match, the token jobber match, things like that. Typical stuff you'd see from SummerSlam in these early years. There was even a rest in peace match between Giant Gonzalez and The Undertaker. This pretty much was the blow-off of the feud that Gonzalez and Taker had. Harvey Whippleman had taken control of the urn and actually had it in his possession. And Paul Bearer was actually injured by, I think, Mr. Hughes. They did an angle in the summer that year where Mr. Hughes attacked The Undertaker and then beat the crap out of Paul Bearer using the urn up against his head. So Taker, for the first time, was coming out to the ring by himself. He came out to the ring by himself against Giant Gonzalez at SummerSlam, and then halfway through the match, the lights go out and Paul Bearer returns. He comes out to the ring, gives Undertaker the inspiration that he needs to finally beat Giant Gonzalez, and the match was stupid because there was no stipulation. They said it was a rest in peace match, so we're thinking to ourselves, what the fuck is this? Is this like a casket match, or what's the gimmick here? Well, there was no gimmick. Undertaker hit Gonzalez with a top rope clothesline and just pinned him, and then he put a black wreath next to him as he's laying in the ring. So really, there was no stipulation at all. All it was a normal match, and after the match, you actually saw what looked to be a face turn by Giant Gonzalez. Now, I think he was out of the WWE right after this. I don't remember seeing him again, but he actually attacks and beats up Harvey Whippleman after the match and basically goes out kind of like how Andre did at WrestleMania 6 when he beat up Bobby Heenan. And he got the cheers from the crowd and he went on his way or whatever. So Gonzalez was only in the WWE for about 9 months. Actually, less than that, about 8 months. The other memorable match I remember from this pay-per-view is the Bret Hart versus Jerry Lawler match. Since Bret wasn't going to be working with Hogan for the title, they were doing the feud with Jerry Lawler since Jerry Lawler attacked Bret Hart after he won the King of the Ring. They were getting really personal. Lawler was attacking Bret's family and his parents and insulting him, and it was just getting, the feud had a lot of heat to it, a lot of bad blood. You knew Bret Hart wanted to tear the fucking shit out of Jerry Lawler. And they were even doing some cross-promotion. During this time in Memphis, Lawler's territory, WWE guys, including Vince McMahon, Bret Hart, and Owen Hart, were going over to Lawler's territory where he was a babyface and working his heels. I have matches, I have footage of Bret Hart working against Jerry Lawler where Bret's the heel and Lawler's the face from Memphis. It was really cool how Vince was doing this, letting his guys go over there and working with Lawler's promotion a little bit. And Savage even got involved in this too. So it was a very unique situation that they were doing, kind of like years later when they had the Hart Foundation faction and they were babyfaces in Canada and heels in the U.S. Here in 1993, Hart was a heel in Memphis, but he was a babyface in the WWE. And Lawler, same thing. His roles reversed, vice versa. Here he is this fearless heel, this hero of his territory, but yet in the WWE he is a cowardly douchebag pussy. He comes out for his match with Bret Hart on crutches, claims that he's hurt and he can't wrestle, and he's appointed a replacement. His court jester, turns out to be Doink, and Doink and Bret Hart actually have a great match. It's amazing that the plan was to have Bret Hart wrestle Hulk Hogan, but instead he's wrestling fucking Doink. But Matt Bourne was a good worker, and the match he had with Bret that night was awesome. Bret finally beats Doink with the sharpshooter, and then I guess they figure out that Lawler's not hurt, and I think President Jack Tunney, or whoever the fuck the president is at the time, orders Lawler to get in the ring. If he does not get in the ring, he will be suspended for life from the WWE. So Bret Hart finally gets his hands on Lawler after already wrestling a match. He's already had a big match under his belt. Now he's wrestling at 50%, and he still just tears Lawler apart. Beats the ever-loving fuck out of him. Lawler does wind up getting some offense in. I think he uses the crutch on Bret, and the match, was competitive for a while. But eventually, Bret slaps on the sharpshooter on Lawler, and Lawler screams like a bitch and gives up. Little twist they did at the end of the match, Bret won't let go of the sharpshooter. They have about half a dozen WWE officials in there, including Rene Goulet and Pat Patterson and Jack Lanza and all these guys. Somehow, these former great legendary wrestlers can't seem to pull Bret Hart off of Jerry Lawler. Instead of trying to pull Bret off, they're just asking him, hey, let him go, let him go. Anyway, Bret Hart holds onto the sharpshooter forever, to the point where the referee actually reverses his decision and disqualifies Bret Hart and awards the match to Jerry Lawler. And as they're carting Jerry Lawler out on the stretcher, he's raising his hand in the air as he goes through the curtain. It was brilliant shit. Even though I was pissed that Bret wasn't working for the title, that was a great piece of business there with Doink and Lawler. That was hilarious shit. And again, this SummerSlam wasn't really one of my favorites, but still, pretty memorable in its own way. SummerSlam 1994 is another one of my favorites. A case could be made for me for this to be my favorite SummerSlam ever. And a lot of you might be wondering why, good mic work, there's only a couple of good matches on that show. Yes, there was, but it was just the personal memories that it brings back for me is another reason why I ranked this SummerSlam so high. I really enjoyed it for a lot of reasons, and another reason that people overlook is that back in 1994, we've talked about this many times, the WWE was incredibly out of touch. Vince McMahon just got finished fighting the federal government in court over steroid distribution charges and all of that. The WWE was in a ton of turmoil behind the scenes, and then in front of the camera, nobody gave a shit about wrestling. Wrestling wasn't in. The WWE, they were drawing shitty houses, ratings were low, just overall business was bad, and I think Vince lost several $1 million that year. And I knew they lost a few million in 1995 as well. So times were hard in the WWE back then. So for them to be able to put a pay-per-view like this together in an arena that big, they opened up the United Center in Chicago. The WWE was the first event ever held at the United Center. And I gotta tell you, I don't think the WWE has ever been back. I have no idea why. Maybe you guys could fill me in if any of you live in the Chicago area. I'd like to know why. And I remember WCW during the Monday Night Wars, they used to run a ton of shows in that building. Several Nitros emanated from that location. So it's just one of those funny behind-the-scenes things that I've always just been curious about, why the WWE, after opening up that building, never went back there. But anyway, like I was saying about 1994, business was in the toilet. Things were really bad in the WWE and in pro wrestling in general. Hulk Hogan had also just jumped over to WCW. So if you're tired of the dumb, cartoony, gimmicky, childish characters in the WWE, you can't even go over to WCW anymore because now Hogan just got there. And who's going to follow Hogan? Every stupid 80s gimmick there was. Earthquake, Big Boss Man, Kamala, all these fucking 80s hokey stars were going to be heading over to WCW, and they were going to try to recreate 1980s WWE in WCW. So now you were fucked. So for the WWE to secure this venue, be the first show ever to take place there, a big arena like this, and sell it out for a major pay-per-view, I thought for 1994, for the time, was a really big deal for the WWE, and I thought, that it really helped them. And on top of that, the matches were good. The energy was good. I really enjoyed the pay-per-view. There were really only two standout matches. I thought the main event fell flat. The WWE gave us wrestling fans some good wrestling, some good in-ring drama throughout this show, but yet they went right back to the hokiness and the childness and the gimmicky, cartoony crap in the main event when they put The Undertaker versus The Undertaker. We might as well talk about that first. That was probably the worst part of the show. It's a match that I did not enjoy. I've talked about it before. The WWE made a very big deal about this. This was a big angle they were using to bring The Undertaker back after he had some surgery after losing the casket match to Yokozuna at the Royal Rumble. They brought in Brian Lee to play the evil Undertaker when Million Dollar Man regains control of him, but still, it was noticeably not the Undertaker. But I think even if you didn't know what was going on, it was pretty obvious to tell right away when the Undertaker returned and turned heel. He turned heel on the Heartbreak Hotel, that talk show that Shawn Michaels had, and that was actually the real Undertaker that came out and cut that promo and turned heel. But the guy that was competing in the ring with the Million Dollar Man was Brian Lee. I'm pretty sure Brian Lee wrestled in all those matches. And then the real Undertaker returns at SummerSlam with Paul Bearer, wrestles himself, defeats himself, but the crowd had just gotten through a hellacious and entertaining and great cage match between Bret and Owen. A lot of drama in that match. We'll talk about that in a second, but I think the crowd, number one, was burnt out, and number two, really just didn't know what to make of what exactly they were seeing. And the storyline and the vignettes leading up to this were brutal. I mean, geez, they were doing all these cheesy little angles where they were interviewing people, they were claiming to have seen The Undertaker, and it was just so horribly done. They even brought in, this is another thing that was pretty crazy for the WWE to do at this time, they thought it would be a good idea to spend money on Leslie Nielsen and George Kennedy, the two stars of the Naked Gun series, which are hilarious movies. But the WWE brought these two guys in to solve the mystery of The Undertaker. Vince McMahon tirelessly referred to them as his super sleuths. I swear, if this was 2014, Michael Cole would be killing himself trying to get super sleuths to trend on Twitter. But despite all of this effort and all of this money and all of this build, the main event was terrible. There wasn't much of a match in the ring. It was just all spectacle. It was all entrance. They took 15 minutes just to get the two Undertakers out there. First, you have to have Ted DiBiase come out there. Then he has to introduce his Undertaker. Then you have to have Paul Bearer come out there. Then he has to introduce his Undertaker. The whole fucking thing takes forever. And then boom, 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 you have a stupid little match in the ring. Several tombstones later, Brian Lee is buried, and The Undertaker sits in the ring again with the music and the lights and the whole deal, and Paul Bearer's urn now lights up. I remember the next set of TV tapings, Macho Man on commentary when Paul Bearer came out on Raw, and Macho Man goes, "Did you check out that urn at SummerSlam? Did that shed some light?" It was one of my favorite just Macho Man stupid one-liners ever, and it was a sad day for me as a big Macho Man fan, because SummerSlam was the last pay-per-view that we ever saw the Macho Man in the WWE. I still to this day, say that, for people that speculate over what went on between the Macho Man and Vince McMahon and why he never brought Macho Man back in and exactly what went on there. There's also the crazy rumors that Macho Man slept with Stephanie McMahon and all of that. Here's what the deal is, I think. I think Vince McMahon, plain and simply, was devastated and heartbroken and betrayed when Macho Man left. I just got done talking about how hard times were in the WWE. Macho Man was the only guy that Vince McMahon had left that could be considered the legendary icon. Bret Hart was getting there, but not quite yet. Macho Man was the only guy that Vince had that had the same household name recognition as Hulk Hogan, who had just jumped over to WCW. I think Vince really liked Randy Savage. I think he liked him better than Hogan. I thought he was proud of his legacy. I thought he was happy to have him. And when Savage abruptly left and took the money and went down to WCW, I've mentioned it before. Go back and watch Raw when Vince McMahon makes the announcement and actually tells the fans it was almost off script or out of character, breaking kayfabe sort of, because Vince was still an announcer back at that point. And he had to come on TV and just quietly tell the fans, if you're wondering where Macho Man is, his contract is up. We weren't able to reach an agreement. I just want to thank Randy Savage for all his contributions to the WWE over the years. You were fantastic. And basically wished Randy well, but you could see it. You could see it in his eyes that he was First of all, devastated, and number two, really pissed off. You could just see it in his eyes. It was almost, he was talking good to Randy Savage, but he was, letting Randy know in code that he was very, very pissed off with him. So even though Vince McMahon has kissed and made up with everybody who left him, Hulk Hogan, Kevin Nash, Scott Hall, so many others, even more serious situations like Bret Hart and Bruno Sammartino, Vince McMahon has made amends with all of these people. So why didn't he with Savage? Because Savage left Vince when he needed him the most. The same argument can be made for Hall and Nash later on in 1996 because things weren't any better then. But of course, those guys leaving subsequently led to the birth of the NWO, which forced the WWE to change their direction and fight back harder, and it actually turned out to be good for business. But when Randy left, things stayed pretty bad there for several years after, and I think Vince maybe just really held a grudge. But let me stop getting sidetracked here and get back to the pay-per-view. One of the great matches on the show was Bret Hart versus Owen Hart in a cage. This was basically the blow-off to WrestleMania, although these guys would continue to feud throughout the years. When Owen beat Bret at WrestleMania 10, the idea was to have these guys feud for the belt all summer on the house show circuit and then have the big blow-off at SummerSlam. Turns out it was a cage match. There was Hart family members all around the ring for this thing, including Stu and Helen. The British Bulldog made his return to the WWE this night after being gone for a couple of years in WCW. He came back for, like I said, for the time and for how dire things were in the WWE and how hurting they were for talent. For me, I was thrilled to see the British Bulldog in the front row. I was like, sweet, they're bringing the Bulldog back. Thank God, they fucking need it. And he can fit right into this Hart family storyline because everybody knows where the British Bulldog came from and his history with the Harts and the fact that he's married to Diana, so he fits in perfectly with this, and he can be an ally to Bret. And Owen and Bret put on a beautiful cage match that night. I like this cage match because cage matches are meant, to be a brutal style of match. And not that this match wasn't brutal, but they kept referring to the fact that the cage was there more for the Hart family that's surrounding the ring. It's there to keep those guys out of the ring and to keep Bret and Owen, the two participants in the match, inside the ring. And what I liked about this match is that they took a violent match and they made it beautiful. WWE was very PG back then. All these PG haters that are so idiotic now, boy, you would have hated the product back then, let me tell you. If you can't handle the shit you see today in 2014, I promise you, you would have gone out of your mind 20 years ago. But they had a blood ban. Bret and Owen have this cage match, this long cage match. I think this thing went almost 30 minutes without a drop of blood being spilled. After the finish, where Bret Hart escapes the cage with Owen dangling there, losing, then you have the big brawl with the family members. Neidhart jumps over the railing, clotheslines the British Bulldog, jumps in the ring, and him and Owen just beat the crap out of Bret Hart. I think they even locked the cage door so none of the other brothers could get in. The Hart family members are all scaling the cage, trying to get in to save Bret's ass, and, Owen and Anvil keep fighting him off. Finally, British Bulldog breaks free and hops over there and saves Bret Hart. But it was great shit. I always enjoyed, to this day, looking back at that Bret and Owen feud. It's one of my favorite feuds of all time, mostly because I'm such a Hart family mark. I'm fascinated with the Hart family and the history of them, and, of course, Bret Hart was my favorite wrestler. The only issue I took with this match, of course, is that it was not the main event. I think it should have been. It was the WWE title, and that was one mistake I think the WWE made that night, was reserving the main event spot for a hokey, cartoony, comic book, superhero type of match. The old tradition of the Intercontinental title changing hands at SummerSlam is back. This time, Razor Ramon wins back the Intercontinental title by beating Diesel. This was a great match. Lots of shit involved. Shawn Michaels, of course, was in Diesel's corner. Him and Diesel actually won the tag team titles the night before at a house show, a very rare house show title change. The WWE decided that, hey, if we're going to take the title off of Diesel, we want to keep him strong. They had Shawn and Diesel beat the Head Shrinkers and win the tag team belts. So Diesel shows up at SummerSlam wearing two belts. You didn't see that very often back then. You didn't see a guy hold two titles at the same time. That was rare. As a matter of fact, other than, Warrior beating Hogan at WrestleMania 6 and then forfeiting the title, I can't think of any situation in the WWE prior to that where a guy held two of the titles. Walter Payton, big-time Chicago legend, is in Razor Ramon's corner, and this match was great. I thought it was high energy, the spots were good, Walter Payton and Shawn Michaels added a lot to the match, the crowd was into it, and then, of course, this is where they begin the split of Shawn and Diesel. And, of course, Diesel holds Razor for Shawn to super kick, and Razor gets out of the way. Shawn nails Diesel, he goes down, Razor Ramon covers him and wins back the Intercontinental title. The crowd goes ballistic, and Razor celebrates in the ring with Walter Payton and his son. I was happy for Razor Ramon. Back then, I thought Razor Ramon was one of the best Intercontinental Champions the WWE had ever had. No other matches on this show were that great or that memorable. However, they did turn Tatanka heel at this show. I've mentioned in the past that I was swerved by this. I actually did not see this coming. I have to honestly admit, I normally know what direction they're going to go. I'm usually not surprised by very much, and even back then, I was kind of in the know. I knew what was going on, but I actually did not see this coming, and I was swerved by it, which is another reason why I like this SummerSlam so much, because, I remember the shock that I had when they pulled this swerve. SummerSlam 1994 was a great pay-per-view, I have to say. It really was, because like I said, they pulled off this pay-per-view, this great pay-per-view during a time when it didn't look like any of that was possible. 1994 was shit, but a great WrestleMania and a great SummerSlam that year, I think really helped the WWE's business and might have helped prevent them from actually going out of business. Things would not go so well the following year in 1995. This is usually on my list of worst SummerSlams of all time, so I won't spend too much time on 1995. But number one, the main event was garbage. Nothing against Mabel, may he rest in peace, but that was not the match they needed to have at SummerSlam. Shawn and Diesel had just wrestled at WrestleMania 11. They actually turned Shawn babyface because of some circumstances that took place in that match. But if everything would have been booked properly, the main event you needed for SummerSlam was Shawn Michaels versus Diesel. Fucking rematch. Do what you did in 1994 with Bret and Owen. Put this shit in a cage if you have to. Make it a gimmick match. Something like that. That should have been your main event. Instead, they decided to try to make Mabel, because Vince back then is still very into big guys. WCW is starting to get on the map, I believe, at this time with the Giant. The WWE feels like they need a Giant. They really don't have one. And here you have this, this monster Mabel on this bright, colorful, Fruity Pebble tag team. And Vince decides to turn him heel and have him win the King of the Ring, and that's going to be his big, bad monster heel. The problem is it just didn't work. I got nothing against, King Mabel. I thought he was funny at times, and he definitely was big, but there was something about him that just didn't strike me as all that menacing, and I didn't think he made a good opponent for Diesel, because Diesel needs someone to bump around for him. Now he's got this big, lumbering, fat giant that's actually probably worse in the ring than Kevin Nash is, and of course we know Kevin Nash is no picnic in there. It just didn't seem like the WWE thinks ahead of what this match is going to look like in the ring to your fans in the main event of SummerSlam. These guys aren't going to be able to do anything in there, and the match was horrible. Diesel, of course, thankfully won and retained his title, but it was awful, and I just hated it. I thought Shawn was the guy that Diesel needed to be in the ring with, and that's the way it should have gone. But Shawn, had a match of his own that night. Actually had the match of the year that night with Razor Ramon in a ladder match. This was a ladder match rematch from WrestleMania 10. These guys had already worked together about a year and a half prior to this. Interesting story behind this match. This was supposed to be Shawn Michaels versus Sid. Shawn was going to defend the Intercontinental title against Sid at SummerSlam. Gorilla Monsoon, who was working as the interim WWE president at the time, just flat out cancels the match. And this was WWE's way of changing their mind behind the scenes and trying to come up with a storyline as to why they changed their minds on TV. Gorilla Monsoon uses the excuse that he's going to do what's right for the fans, and if he feels like a match needs to be changed, then that's what he's going to do. He's basically going to be the people's president. So Gorilla felt that the fans did not want to see Shawn Michaels versus Sid. They wanted to see Shawn Michaels versus Razor Ramon, completely random. These guys were both baby faces. They were not feuding at the time. They really had nothing going on with each other at all. As a matter of fact, they were friends. They were starting to show a little bit of that on WWE TV, some locker room spots. I know at the previous In Your House, when they had the lumberjack match and Shawn won the Intercontinental title, he was celebrating with Razor Ramon. So these guys, if anything, were friends. And so Gorilla Monsoon feels that a good business decision for the WWE is to put two guys who have nothing going on with each other in the ring randomly with a ladder and a title belt. Now, I think this was WWE's way of making sure the pay-per-view had at least one great match, because if it was Shawn versus Sid, I'm sure the match would be good, but it would be nothing like Shawn versus Scott Hall. And of course, the WWE must have known in their head already that the main event is going to be shit. And the rest of the card is shit too, so they needed something. So this match, I think, was thrown together to help sell this pay-per-view, and the match was good, but still, just like in 1994 with Bret and Owen, how they had that great cage match with no blood, it's the same type of deal. They got this deal with Disney or this violence ban, no chair shots, no blood, no nothing. So Shawn and Razor had to work this ladder match completely differently than they worked it at WrestleMania 10. They could not use the ladder as a weapon. Can you fucking believe that? Be careful about how hard you complain about this stupid PG, childish type WWE product that you see. You have not seen anything. You have no idea what these guys had to go through back then, you know, with all these fucking restrictions and these rules, and Shawn and Razor still managed to put on just as good of a ladder match as they did at WrestleMania 10, despite the fact that they had to use the ladder and be much more creative with it than they had to in their previous match. And this time, Shawn got the victory, so he retained his title. You know, Razor won a ladder match, Shawn won a ladder match. They're 1-1. I wish they would have had a rubber match. But that was the only thing on this pay-per-view that was even worth looking at, was that great ladder match between Shawn and Razor. Now, just a few other tie-ins with this main event, Shawn Michaels, Razor Ramon, Diesel, Mabel match, and all that. I can't believe I'm remembering this off the top of my head. Sid, like I said, was bumped from the Intercontinental title match against Shawn. Well, they had already announced that since he was bumped from the match, he was going to face the winner of the ladder match, I believe, on the September 5th Raw, which ironically was the very first Nitro. So Sid versus Shawn, that was supposed to take place at SummerSlam, was the big match on Raw that they were using to compete with WCW's very first show. Who appeared on that very first show? Surprisingly, Lex Luger. And that's one thing I forgot to mention about the main event with Mabel and Diesel, is that the British Bulldog and Lex Luger were a tag team. They were the Allied Powers. They ran the angle on Raw right before SummerSlam, I think just a week before, where Davey Boy Smith turns heel. They are breaking up the Allied Powers because the WWE was suspicious that Lex was going to be jumping to WCW. They tell the story like he left overnight and shocked everybody, but I remember back then, these were the days. This is when I first started calling some hotlines here or there. They had some wrestling hotlines you could call, you know, back in 92, 93, 94, 95. I can't remember if I was getting the torch yet back then at this time, but anyway, I somehow knew that Lex Luger was talking to WCW. Everybody knew that he could possibly be jumping ship. And the rumors for this started before SummerSlam, so Lex Luger actually made an appearance in the main event. We were all wondering what was going to happen with the Allied Powers, assuming Lex Luger sticks around. British Bulldog turned heel, turned on Kevin Nash, who he had teamed with one night when Lex wasn't in the building. I think Lex wasn't on TV for Raw one week, and they just brought out the Bulldog. So the WWE fucking knew. I don't care what anybody said. They knew that this was a possibility that Lex Luger was going to be going back to WCW. I think that's why they turned the Bulldog heel to begin with. Well, Lex Luger does do a run-in in the main event, and this was one of his last appearances. I think he worked maybe a house show the night after or something like that, but basically about 9 days later, he showed up on Nitro on the very first edition. I never really realized until I talked about it out loud how much history is actually involved in those two big matches at SummerSlam 1995. This pay-per-view was also the debut of Kane. You know, this was his first work in the WWE. He came in as Dr. Isaac Yankem, Jerry Lawler's evil dentist, because Bret Hart and Jerry Lawler had a Kiss My Foot match at the King of the Ring. Give me a break. A Kiss My Foot match. Fucking ridiculous. And Jerry Lawler apparently doesn't wash his feet for weeks leading up to this, and then of course he loses, and Bret Hart takes Lawler's own foot and shoves it in his own mouth. Lawler is disgusted by this. He's puking in the back. He's freaked out. He's brushing his teeth psychotically. Hires a dentist to try to get the smell out of his mouth, I guess. It turns out to be Isaac Yankem. He brings him in as his evil heel to fight his battles for him and to take out Bret Hart. Now Kane, a.k.a. Isaac Yankem, came over from USWA. He was working as Unabomb over there. I have some tapes, and I used to watch him play that gimmick, and I remember how big he was, and everybody used to compare him to the size of Sid. I actually thought bringing this guy in with a proper gimmick, he could be better than Sid. He could feud with Sid. He could be a new Sid, you know, but they take this big monster who looks like $1 million, and they make him a fucking dentist. It's like, Jesus, hello, Vince, you know, you're so desperate for talent, you know, you're trying to make Mabel your next big star. You've got this monster just sitting here, you know, and you're going to make him a fucking dentist. It's just, what the fuck went on in these creative meetings back then? I mean, you could have just brought him in as Unabomb. I mean, maybe tweaked up his outfit or his character a little bit, but that would have been much better than the fucking dentist. And then once they dropped that, they made the fucking guy the new Diesel. It took a long time for Yankem to realize that he was Kane. And thank God that gimmick came about, because otherwise, you know, fuck. Glenn Jacobs wouldn't have amounted to shit in the wrestling business with gimmicks like that. This pay-per-view also had the debut of Shane Douglas, or Dean Douglas. Now, I think he had done some vignettes on TV, but throughout the show, during SummerSlam, they kept cutting back to him backstage, where he was grading and critiquing all of the matches. And back then, I think the WWE did have plans for Dean Douglas. But again, you know, you got Shane Douglas, this great wrestler. You know, he's made a name for himself outside of the WWE, and they bring him in as a school teacher. He was a school teacher in real life, but it's just one of those things where you got to be a dentist or a a teacher or a clown or a trash man or fucking something. It fucking sucked back then. The only real, actually good wrestling match we had on this whole fucking pay-per-view was the opening match, Hakushi versus the 1-2-3 Kid. And you know what? While we're at it, let's get SummerSlam 1996 out of the way as well. This one was equally bad. I did not enjoy this SummerSlam at all. The WWE was struggling at this time. I did review King of the Ring 1996 on my pay-per-view and DVD reviews. You can check that out on my main page or check the description below for the link. But that was actually a good pay-per-view. WWE, you know, in those hard times was able to put on, I thought, a fantastic pay-per-view for how dire things were. Scott Hall and Kevin Nash had just left. Bret Hart wasn't around. You know, WCW was breathing down their neck. They were struggling, and they put on a great pay-per-view that night, and they had, of course, the birth of Austin 316 and a whole bunch of other things. Well, now, you fast forward 2 months later to SummerSlam 1996. The Ultimate Warrior is gone. Ahmed Johnson, who won the Intercontinental title at that pay-per-view at King of the Ring, I think had gotten injured and wasn't. I don't even think the Intercontinental title was defended at this SummerSlam. They were about to have the tournament for it on Raw. And the WWE title match, the main event, was intriguing. Vader had just come in. He was going to be the WWE's next big bad monster, and he was an established star. He was huge in Japan. He was huge in WCW. Everybody knew who Vader was. I was actually happy to see him in the WWE, and I thought him and Shawn would work some good matches together because Vader is actually pretty agile for a big guy, but for some reason back then, we all know what a prick Shawn Michaels was and all the fucking personal problems he had, and he was always just fucked up on pills or fucked up on something or fucked up on attitude, and he was just a miserable fucking son of a bitch to be around and impossible to work with. And I really think he helped fuck over Big Leon, you know, in his big push, because the plan was for them to do what they did at SummerSlam, because remember in the main event, like, Vader won the match 3 times, count out, disqualification, whatever. You know, Jim Cornette keeps ordering the match to be restarted, and then finally Shawn beats him at the end. Well, the big match at Survivor Series where Sid beat Shawn Michaels for the title, that was supposed to be Vader. This whole program was supposed to be Vader. They were going to have the match at SummerSlam, and then Vader was going to beat Shawn at Survivor Series the same way Sid beat him, by beating up Jose Lothario and all of that. They were going to do the same exact angle, and then Shawn would go to the Royal Rumble to face WWE Champion Vader in his hometown of San Antonio and win back the belt. But they put Sid in Vader's place because Shawn didn't want to fucking work with Vader. And when you go back and watch the match with Vader at SummerSlam, you can see the spot that Vader botched when he forgot to move out of the way of a Shawn Michaels elbow, and Shawn, I think, kind of changes direction in midair, lands on his feet, and then screams at Vader to move and fucking kicks him right in his head and called him an idiot or an asshole or a fuckhead or something like that right in the ring. You could see Shawn Michaels broke character, and he was screaming at Vader, you know, in the middle of the ring at the main event of your fucking pay-per-view. Yes, Vader botched the spot, but a professional would let some shit like that go and maybe have a little chat with him in the back after the match or something like that. To do what Shawn did in the middle of the ring, in the middle of that match, I thought was so fucking unprofessional. It was one of the reasons why, you know, everybody just hated that son of a bitch back then. And I think he had some other issues with Vader as well. I remember watching a lot of Jim Cornette shoot interviews, and he would mention that, you know, a few things happened between these guys, you know, some incidents on house shows and things like that. So Shawn, I think, just probably went to Vince and says, hey, I don't want to work with this guy anymore, put somebody else in his place. That's when they brought in Sid, and Sid took over from there in the Vader storyline, and it sucked. It was a shame. Another memorable thing that did happen on this pay-per-view, even though the pay-per-view sucked, was the Boiler Room Brawl between Mankind and The Undertaker, and Mankind scores yet another victory over The Undertaker. This time with the surprising, or the not-so-surprising, Paul Bearer heel turn. Paul Bearer actually turns on The Undertaker, and that's what they did at SummerSlam. Now Mankind owns 2 victories, you know, at 2 big pay-per-views against The Undertaker, and it was probably this victory that gave him the title shot against Shawn Michaels the next month at In Your House. Another interesting thing looking back at this pay-per-view is at the time they were doing the angle with Jake the Snake Roberts, where he had recovered from his alcohol addiction and all of that. And of course, Jerry Lawler, being the evil heel that he was fucking with Jake Roberts on Raw leading up to SummerSlam, you know, throwing alcohol in his face, attacking him, making fun of him, constantly cracking jokes about Jake's addiction and his problems and all of that. And looking back now, it was uncomfortable because this was way too early for Jake. You know, back in 1996 when he briefly came back into the WWE, he had briefly found religion, which briefly cleaned him up, not for long. Didn't last long at all, but he came on TV and basically he was a changed man. He was clean and sober. He had found God. We see how long that lasted, a matter of months, really. But I still thought it was way too early, you know, to bring storylines like that up on TV. And Lawler was all over Jake about his problems, and then they have the SummerSlam match And the funny thing is they got Mark Henry, who just come into the WWE, had not even had his first match. He would have his first match the next month later against Jerry Lawler. They bring him out to do commentary during the Jake Roberts-Jerry Lawler match, and what's funny is this pay-per-view took place in Cleveland. It's almost like Jerry Lawler's second hometown. He is a huge Cleveland Indians fan, so what Jerry Lawler does is he comes out there wearing a Baltimore Ravens jersey. This was the same year that Art Modell moved the team, the Cleveland Browns, to Baltimore and make them the Baltimore Ravens. Cleveland had no football team at this point. And Lawler, being the heel that he is, he comes out there and he ribs his own fucking people. I mean, the fans were livid. I was worried that Lawler was going to get shot. But during the match, Lawler actually pulls out another bottle of Jack Daniels and starts pouring it in Jake the Snake Roberts' face. And Mark Henry actually gets up from the announce table and interrupts him and stops him, leading to their match the next month at In Your House, which was Mark Henry's debut. As far as the rest of the card of SummerSlam 1996, I'm not going to talk about the rest of the card from 1996. You can go back and look that shit up yourself. It was terrible, and it's really not worth talking about. Let's move on to SummerSlam 1997, Heart and Soul. I know you guys are getting sick of me talking about Bret Hart, so luckily for you, this is the final SummerSlam that he had appeared in. Well, almost. I know I'm going to have to bring him up 12 years later, but for the most part, Bret Hart is finished with being a big part of SummerSlam. He got the title match against The Undertaker at this pay-per-view. This was in the summer of 1997, probably one of my favorite, if not the favorite, time period in wrestling I can ever remember experiencing. I highly enjoyed the whole Canada versus USA feud, the Hart Foundation versus Stone Cold, and everything else that was going on in the WWE in the summer of 1997. They had the Great In Your House Canadian Stampede. They had a great series of Raws where they were going back and forth from Canada to the United States. The crowds were as hot, I think, as I've ever seen them. The electricity in the building for the WWE during that time was more intense, I think, than it had ever been in the company's history. And they gave Bret Hart the title match against The Undertaker at this pay-per-view, and Shawn Michaels was the guest referee. All sorts of drama with Shawn Michaels going on during this time of the year. If you remember, February of that same year was when he lost his smile and went home with a knee injury, which causes him to miss WrestleMania and the rematch with Bret Hart. He comes back several months later as if he wasn't even injured at all, like he never missed a beat, came back and won the tag team titles with Stone Cold, and then had the match with Stone Cold at the King of the Ring. The night after the King of the Ring on Raw was when Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels got in their locker room fight. There was a lot of slapping and hair pulling and all sorts of shit going on. Shawn Michaels stormed out and left, and he was actually trying to get out of the WWE. He had told them that it was an unsafe working environment. He has to worry about getting fights every time he shows up to Raw, and I think he was trying to use this as a way to get out of his WWE contract so he could go to WCW and join Scott Hall and Kevin Nash. He really missed Hall and Nash around this time. And luckily for Vince, he had Shawn under contract, because if there was any sort of loophole in Shawn's contract or his contract came up or anything like that, Shawn was going to leave. I think this was one of the first times where Vince just had to suck it up and pay Shawn, because I think around this time his contract actually did come up. And he did re-sign his contract for a lot of money, and it was one of Vince's first ever guarantees. But I think during the summer of 1997, if there was a way for Shawn to go to WCW, he would have. I even remember the famous picture that was surfacing around the early internet around this time, is when Shawn showed up at a house show, a WWE house show, wearing an Outsiders t-shirt, and there was a picture of him. If I can find it, I'll put it up on the screen here. So anyway, long story short, they finally get Shawn to come back, and they make him the special referee in the Bret Hart Undertaker match. Now, it's interesting that Shawn and Bret are now still going to be working together in this program. So, I think Vince, Shawn, and Bret had to have a sit-down talk. They had to, bury the hatchet as best as possible and agree to move forward and work together and do business. And any personal issues they had with each other have to be cast aside, in order for them to do business. And I actually like the angle that they did at SummerSlam. Now, I don't know why Shawn wasn't getting back in the ring yet. I mean, if you ask me, Shawn was needed for a pay-per-view like this, especially a big pay-per-view that they need to sell. You should have had Shawn, I think, involved wrestling somehow, but they made him the special guest referee, which was interesting because it gave him a great way to get the title off of Taker, yet keep him strong, and that way they can give it to Bret like they probably always planned on doing when he first turned heel. Little did I know, as a Bret Hart fan, what a great night this was for me. This was really the beginning of the end. end. I mean, putting that belt on Brett is what led to the whole fucking chaos and clusterfuck of the Survivor Series and the screw job. Looking back now, if Vince would have found a way not to put the belt on Brett or to take it off of him right away, then he wouldn't have had those problems at Survivor Series. But, just looking back, it's just funny how everything works. But anyway, I really liked the finish of the match. They had Brett and Shawn getting in each other's faces. Finally Shawn gets really pissed. Brett spits in his face. Shawn's got a chair in his hand, and he goes to hit Brett. He moves out of the way. Shawn nails Taker. Down goes Taker, and Shawn, as the referee, is forced to count to 1, 2, 3 because they have stipulations in this match. There were stipulations all over SummerSlam involving this, Hart Foundation feud. And one of the stipulations was, in the main event, if Bret Hart lost, he vowed never to wrestle again in the United States. To me, there was no way that was going to work. I thought the ending was somewhat predictable. Everybody pretty much thought that Bret Hart was going to take the belt from Taker, especially with Shawn Michaels involved. But Shawn Michaels and Bret have all this heat, and they're still playing that up on TV. So the other stipulation is that if Shawn Michaels fucks over Bret Hart, then he also cannot wrestle anymore in the United States. So when Shawn hit Undertaker with the chair, they made it seem like he had no choice but to count the 3. And if he didn't count the 3, then he wouldn't be able to wrestle in the United States. Well, if you ask me, once Shawn Michaels used the chair, once a referee used a foreign object, to me, that's the stipulation. He shouldn't have been able to wrestle anymore in the United States. But anyway, they kind of bended the rules on that a little bit and just had Shawn count the 3 count. And, of course, new WWE champion. And that kicks off the feud of Undertaker and Shawn Michaels. And this was really Shawn's heel turn. Now, granted, he didn't do this on purpose. The next night on Raw, he came out and cut a pretty good promo. I mean, this is when the Attitude Era really started rolling, because now Shawn was coming out there and being an asshole on TV. He was taking the guy that you saw backstage and putting him on TV. Cocky, arrogant, jerk-off prick. And he was letting the fans know it. And it was great. Shawn was a good heel, I think, back then. This was also the infamous night that shortened Stone Cold Steve Austin's career. I mean, this was a match I was really looking forward to. You had Intercontinental Champion Owen Hart, basically number 2 in command of the Hart Foundation, taking on Austin, who had just been feuding with his brother Bret earlier on in the year. Austin was really getting hot. They had the big match at WrestleMania 13 between him and Bret, where they basically switched roles. Austin was now a full-fledged babyface. He was over as shit. Those T-shirts were selling off the rack. I remember ordering an Austin 316 T-shirt in 1997, and it literally took about 3 months for me to get it. They were so fucking back-ordered. It was ridiculous. I mean, you saw bootlegs all over the place. I mean, people were so into Stone Cold. He was hot as hell, and he was definitely going to be winning the Intercontinental title. I don't think anybody doubted it for a second, and there was a stipulation added in this match. They did an angle on Raw where the Hart Foundation and Stone Cold, they basically named stipulations for every single match on SummerSlam that night. The Hart Foundation named a bunch of stips, and then Austin named one of his own, and he said, if I can't beat you for the Intercontinental title, then I'll kiss your ass. Like, literally put my lips to your ass. He said, I'll kiss his ass if I can't kick it, and that's the bottom line. So you knew that there was no way this Stone Cold Steve Austin character, the guy that passed out in a bloody heap at WrestleMania 13, is going to get down on his knees and kiss some other man's ass. That was not going to happen. So I knew Austin was going to be winning the IC title. The fans were salivating for it. They wanted to pop hard. Austin, I think, got the biggest pop of the night when he came out to the ring at SummerSlam. So, I mean, he was super fucking over. And then, of course, Owen Hart, the sit-down tombstone pile driver that temporarily paralyzes Steve Austin, and they actually still go through with the finish. That's how desperate, the WWE was back then. If you ask me, this match should have been stopped right away, right in its tracks, and you can always do the Intercontinental title match sometime in the future, which they did at Survivor Series that year, but I think they could have waited on this all along, because they insisted on having Austin do the worst roll-up in the history of the business to pin a great wrestler like Owen Hart. It looked like shit. It completely killed the match. It killed the vibe, and you were wondering what the fuck you just saw. Austin can barely fucking walk. They're helping him to the back. He suffered a stinger and some other neck problems. He had to sit out a few months after this. They kept him on TV, on Raw, coming out to the ring, attacking the Hart Foundation, doing everything he can to get his hands on him, but he wasn't actually having a match. He didn't have a match until he returned and beat Owen Hart again for the Intercontinental title at Survivor Series. So they gave Austin the IC title at SummerSlam, and they really shouldn't have, because they had to take it right off of him right away. They held a stupid tournament, wound up giving it back to Owen, but it was a shame. It killed instilled a really good vibe on a pay-per-view. I mean, we were all so excited for it. I remember watching it that night, really anxious to see Stone Cold win the title. And then that wound up happening to him. And, we knew that Austin could be in really bad shape. And it sucked, and he was off of TV. And that match and that injury is what led to him retiring in 2003. Austin might have been in the ring all the way up until a couple of years ago, had that not happened. And it's a shame, and it was a very scary moment, in the history of the business. And I talked about it in my big year-end commentary last year. Somebody asked me what would happen if Austin would have gotten paralyzed that night. And it definitely would have changed things dramatically and definitely changed the course of history in pro wrestling for sure. Few other noteworthy things from SummerSlam 1997. Mankind and Triple H had a great cage match to open the show. This was right after Mankind had become Dude Love, winning the tag team titles with Stone Cold, but he was back to being Mankind, trying to finish off his feud with, Triple H that had started at the King of the Ring, had gone through and In Your House, and now I believe this was the blow-off, big cage match. Mankind wins, climbs up to the top, he pulls off his shirt, and he's supposed to reveal like a heart tattoo on his chest, but I think the makeup wore off, you couldn't even see it, but he basically jumped from the top, Jimmy Snuka style, onto Triple H and won the match. All those Hart Foundation stipulations that I mentioned, another one was Brian Pillman versus Goldust. This was only about a month and a half before Pillman died. And the stipulation in this match, because Pillman was fucking around with Marlena, is that if Pillman lost, he had to wear a dress. And so Pillman lost. He didn't put the dress on, but he ended up wrestling in a dress, a few weeks in a row on Raw after the pay-per-view. I think he had to wrestle in the dress until he won a match. He kept losing. That meant he kept having to wear a dress. Ken Shamrock took on the British Bulldog. The stipulation in this was, I think the loser had to eat dog food. This was another stipulation that never came to fruition. I think it was a double DQ. I think Bulldog actually threw dog food in Ken Shamrock's face during the match. Shamrock loses his mind and snaps and goes completely ape shit on the Bulldog, and the whole thing just ended, I think, just in a schmoz. So all in all, 1997 I think was a good pay-per-view. I just think it was really dampered by the injury of Stone Cold. But it was definitely a very interesting time and a very fun time in the WWE. That summer of 1997 was fucking magic. SummerSlam 1998 was the highway to hell. We are in full-blown Attitude Era mode by this point. And I loved this summer as well. I loved this whole year. As a matter of fact, like I just mentioned about my year-end commentary a minute ago, one of the questions I got in that commentary was which year do I think was the most fun in wrestling? And I definitely think 1998 was the most fun because the Attitude Era was brand spanking new. Everything that the WWE was doing at that time was a completely opposite form of entertainment from what they were doing prior to that, and it was all new, it was all fresh, new characters, just a whole new identity of pro wrestling was being developed during this year, and it was just a fucking kick-ass time. The main event was Stone Cold defending the WWE title against The Undertaker. They were actually starting to tease an Undertaker heel turn around this point, and even tease an alliance with Kane. That was going on all summer long during 1998, but still Undertaker was a babyface. He was still respected. This was a good match. They even filmed a really awesome music video for this. Set to AC/DC's Highway to Hell. They filmed it in like an alley where there's fire and flames and explosions and all that shit with Undertaker and Stone Cold just hyping up the match, and it was something different that the WWE had not done. They were spending a little bit of money, they were upgrading their production, things were just looking better. And the SummerSlam was back in Madison Square Garden, so having a great match with these two WWE icons like Stone Cold and The Undertaker was a pretty fitting main event to put in front of this particular crowd. And it was a pretty long match too. They had a couple of good spots in this match, including The Undertaker jumping off the top rope and leg dropping Stone Cold on the announce table. Unbelievable. Don't forget, Undertaker's 7 feet tall, 300 pounds doing this shit. He ain't Shawn Michaels. So it's pretty amazing to see a spot like that in a match, involving two guys like this. And Austin even got knocked loopy in the match. When you go back and watch the tape, I don't know how Austin was even able to finish this match. If that was me, I would have been in the hospital for fucking 6 months. The Undertaker does this spot frequently in a match where, they throw the guy into the ropes and they go for a backdrop. And he telegraphed it, and whenever you do that, the guy going off the ropes is always going to kick you right in the chest. Well, Undertaker does his spot that when that happens to him and he gets kicked, he pops right up Undertaker style, like really fast. So when Austin went to kick Undertaker, when he put his head down for the backdrop, Undertaker shot right up like that, but Austin's face was over top of the Undertaker's head, and when Undertaker came up, he caught Stone Cold right underneath the chin. I mean, that's like taking a punch to the face, but instead of your fist, it's a skull. And I think it completely knocks Stone Cold right out. You could see he was, his jaw. I thought he broke his jaw. I don't know how he didn't break his jaw. I don't know how he didn't knock any teeth out. I don't know how he didn't completely shatter his whole fucking face with that move. How Stone Cold survived that, I have no fucking idea. I mean, I almost cringe when I go back and watch it. It's hard to see. It's not like it's HD and in slow motion and up close or anything like that, but you can tell the velocity of the blow that Austin took, and I'm just surprised. I mean, he's tough as nails, man. I'm telling you, if that was me, I wouldn't even know where the fuck I was or what my name was, or I probably wouldn't be conscious at all. I'd probably be picking up my teeth off the mat and screaming for my mommy. But he got through it, powered through the match, won the match, retained the WWE title, and a really cool show of respect at the end where Undertaker hands the belt to Austin. Awesome ladder match at this pay-per-view as well. Intercontinental title, The Rock against Triple H. I mean, unbelievable. This was during the Nation of Domination and DX feud. Nation were the heels, DX were the baby faces, and Triple H and Chyna went out there and took on The Rock, who had Mark Henry in his corner. It was a really, really good ladder match. The Rock was still new. I mean, he wasn't even in the business for 2 years yet, and he was out there having a really good ladder match with Triple H. It had everything. It had creative spots. It had some blood and all the fucking bullshit that they had to deal with in 1995 with Shawn Michaels and Razor Ramon. That shit was out the fucking window. These two guys could do whatever they wanted. And I'd say it was probably the second best ladder match that ever took place in that building. Obviously, the first was WrestleMania 10, Shawn Michaels, Razor Ramon, but this match really held up. It still does when you go back and watch it. It's great. The finish even saw Chyna nut-shotting The Rock off the ladder, allowing Triple H to climb up and grab the belt. The crowd fucking went nuts. They popped hard. Triple H was hugely over, and it sucks, too. I mean, he was actually working with a knee injury at this time, and so when he won the Intercontinental title, I remember right after this, I don't even think he defended the title. If I remember right, they had to take it off of him and do a tournament or something, because I remember Ken Shamrock winning that, so I think that injury is what led to that. So it's a shame that Triple H won the IC title that night, but he never was able to have a run with it. And it sucks, too, because he needed it. He was a bubbling star. He wasn't to the level of Austin or Undertaker, but you could tell that guys like him and The Rock were, they were on the rise. So Rock had already had his run, a long run, with the Intercontinental title, and now they were going to do the same thing with Triple H, try to make him, number two in the company almost with the IC belt, and he got fucking injured and it never came about, but he was still hugely over anyway. DX was so hot, you didn't really need the IC title, but I would have liked to see Triple H hold that belt for a little while as a babyface in DX. Speaking of DX, another memorable thing that took place on the show is X-Pac had a hair versus hair match with Jeff Jarrett. These two guys have been feuding a bit on TV, and this was WWE's way of kind of changing Jeff Jarrett's look. So they had him lose the match, they shaved his head in the ring, and this led to what we saw as Jeff Jarrett's main look that he wrestled with throughout the rest of his career. He came back with shorter hair, almost like a crew cut. He started wearing short tights instead of long trunks, and he was done with the whole Double J gimmick and walking around with a fucking flashing cowboy hat and all this shit. He was going to be a little more tougher, a little more attitude, and it was perfect for the time because 1998, that character that Jeff Jarrett was, from 1995 up until 1998, that wasn't going to work in the Attitude Era. So they were trying to change Jeff up, make him a little tougher. He was going to come out there and talk a little bit of trash instead of being so delusional and full of himself and worried about his fucking country music career. Now they were going to start taking him seriously. And it worked, I suppose, because about a year and a half after this, he jumped ship to WCW and won the world title over there. Another thing I found interesting on this SummerSlam is they did a Lion's Den match with Ken Shamrock and Owen Hart. They were feuding at the time, and this was a little bit of like this UFC crossover because Dan Severn was also in the WWE, and Dan Severn and Ken Shamrock were some of those early UFC icons that were out there. So they have Dan Severn in Owen Hart's corner for this Lion's Den match, and it's almost like an octagon. It's a multi-sided ring with a cage on it, and it resembles a UFC ring, although it's still shaped very different. It's almost like a cone shape or a funnel shape. The cage kind of, tilts inward onto the ring, and they actually had this match next door at the Paramount Theater across the street from Madison Square Garden. WWE will do things over there a lot whenever they run big shows at the Garden. I mean, this was actually the third, I think, SummerSlam that took place at the Garden up until this point, 88, 91, and 98, so the first 10 years they had 3 of them take place at MSG. But it was basically just interesting in itself just to see, what the WWE was trying to pass off as a real fight, a real cage match, a real octagon bygone UFC-style fight between Shamrock and Owen Hart, and it really wasn't that. It was just a wrestling match that was taking place in a very unconventional ring, and I think it was hard for these guys to work in this thing. And the mat looked unforgiving as hell. It was basically a miniature-sized wrestling ring, pretty much constructed the same way, but lower to the ground and smaller, probably making a lot tighter and a lot stiffer, and it probably hurt like shit to fall on that thing. I really wasn't that big of a fan of the match. I mean, the WWE was trying things like this. They were trying to do a little bit of that real shoot-style fighting, and it was shortly after this, in fact, that they started the Brawl for All, when we know what a big failure that was. So, WWE was just trying things out. A lot of this shit was probably Vince Russo's idea. But wrestling is wrestling, and I think it needs to stay wrestling, because anytime they tried anything like this, I don't think the Lions Den matches were any good. The Brawl for All obviously sucked ass, and then, of course, we know what happened when they tried to have a real fucking boxing match at WrestleMania, and Butterbean knocked out Bart Gunn in about 5 fucking seconds. It's just a goddamn disaster. So while I applaud them trying new things, this was something I didn't think was going to work out. And if you remember, the tag team titles also changed hands as well at SummerSlam. This was a great night for DX. The Outlaws won the tag team belts, X-Pac shaved Jeff Jarrett's head, and Triple H beat The Rock in a ladder match for the IC title. DX was on a fucking roll. Mankind had to go into this match alone against the Outlaws because his partner Kane, they were starting to tease the alliance with The Undertaker, and Kane, I don't believe, made an appearance at all on the entire pay-per-view. So he basically abandoned Mankind in order to, set up his alliance with Undertaker in upcoming weeks. Mankind goes into a handicap match against the Outlaws. I think Vince McMahon convinced Mankind to go through with the match, and of course the Outlaws kicked his ass and beat him for the tag team titles and threw him in a dumpster at the end of the match. So they completely treated Mick Foley like shit this night, but, it was all part of the storyline, still pretty funny. And this was only 2 months after Mick Foley had Peter Panned off the top of the fucking cell, so he probably still wasn't even 100% at this point, and then he went through another brutal match, a 2-on-1 match, against the Outlaws. I mean, Mick was, it was unbelievable the things he was doing back then. Last, final thing I can think to mention about this SummerSlam is I believe this was the debut of Edge. He had the match, the mixed tag match, right? It was Sable had a mystery partner taking on Mark Mero and Jackie, and Sable announced that her partner was Edge. Now, I don't remember, maybe you guys do, if he had a match on Raw before this or if this was his first actual match. I know they had been running the Edge vignettes on TV, hyping his debut, but I don't know if he had actually debuted at all in the ring yet. So I'm pretty sure, and please, by all means, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure this was Edge's first match in the WWE. Not including, of course, dark matches and shit like that. SummerSlam 1999 was interesting for a couple of reasons. Number one, Vince McMahon and Jesse Ventura kissed and made up. There was some bad blood there. There was some lawsuits. There was some shit going on. And like I was talking about Randy Savage earlier about Vince reconciling with all these guys, Jesse Ventura was another one, that they decided to do business again together. They brought Jesse in. I think SummerSlam was in Minnesota that year, so that made sense. Jesse Ventura was the governor at the time of Minnesota. He had just won in an upset the year before. I mean, it was a huge deal, So Jesse being the governor of Minnesota and being involved in pro wrestling in his life, the first wrestler to do something like that, was a big deal. WWE convinced him to come back in. He caught a ton of heat for that too. People were criticizing him for getting involved in it. He said, shut the fuck up, I'll do what the hell I want. And I really admired Jesse's attitude back then. He was defending wrestling, and he was coming back to make an appearance and help them out and give the fans a little throwback. He even did commentary on Raw one week leading up to SummerSlam, which was really crazy to hear Jesse on commentary again for the first time in, 10 or 11 years. And I thought it was good to see him back. They made him the referee in the triple threat main event between Stone Cold, Mankind, and Triple H. You want to hear something that you don't hear every day? Triple H was held down. Yeah. Did you hear that? Oh, you Triple H haters? He holds people back. He doesn't want to put anybody over. That's what happened to him. What goes around fucking comes around. Stone Cold did not want to drop the belt to Triple H at SummerSlam. And guess what? He fucking should have. Triple H was on the rise all the way to the year prior, like how I just talked about in 1998 when he won the Intercontinental title in the ladder match from The Rock. They were starting to build him as another top star. A year had now passed. He had split from DX. He had turned heel. He had gone in a completely different direction with his character. He was kicking ass. He was great in the ring. He was a good promo. He was good at everything. And so when the WWE decided they wanted to put the belt on him, what needed to happen was Stone Cold needed to wrestle Triple H one-on-one at SummerSlam. That's what needed to happen. And why in the world Stone Cold refused to do this, I have no idea. He did not want to work with Triple H at the time. I don't think he felt that Triple H was a worthy enough star to take the belt off him, which is fucking stupid because all they had to do, some sort of bullshit in the match that caused Austin to get screwed. That's all they had to do. But I think Austin pitched a fit, and the WWE changed it to a triple threat match. And instead of dropping the belt to Triple H, he dropped it to Mankind. Mankind pinned Stone Cold in the main event and won the WWE title. And then the next night on Raw, Triple H beat Mankind for the title in the main event of that show. And so to me, Triple H was robbed of his moment. It's been happening in wrestling for generations. It is never going to stop. People get fucked over, people get screwed over, people get held down, people rise and fall all the time. And anything anyone has ever accused Triple H of doing is no different than anything that was done to him years ago. It's just the way the world works. This pay-per-view was okay. It wasn't one of my favorites, but a surprisingly good match on this pay-per-view was Shane McMahon versus Test. Test had been dating Stephanie McMahon, and it pissed off Shane McMahon, and so they had a match between Test and Shane, where if Shane won, Test had to stop seeing Stephanie, and if Test won, he could continue to see Stephanie. It was called, I believe, a Love Her or Leave Her match. And the fucking shit was actually really good. It was great. Test won at the end, beating Shane McMahon. Stephanie runs in the ring and kisses him. The crowd is fucking going ballistic. It was a great piece of business. They did great, and it was a nice surprise because I didn't think that match was going to be all that great. Shane, was not a wrestler, but he was still pretty athletic and had some really entertaining matches. But Test was a new guy. And I didn't really think their match would be really all that great, but, fucking Shane is the man. That was just an awesome match, and it was just an awesome, storyline and angle. Turned out to be 10 times better than I thought it was when it first started. What's interesting about this pay-per-view, actually, is that all the belts changed hands. And actually, I don't have written down what happened with the hardcore title at this SummerSlam. I don't even know if they had a match or not. But the major belts, all of them changed hands. Of course, Mankind won the world title in the main event. The tag team titles changed hands when Undertaker and Big Show beat X-Pac and Kane. Undertaker had been acting like a mentor to Big Show. He was even, kind of being a jerk to him and, slapping him around and shit like that. But finally, Undertaker and Big Show wind up winning the tag team titles together, and the WWE had thrown them together for whatever reason as some super big heel tag team. But it really didn't work, and it didn't last too long either. But also, you had D'Lo Brown, who simultaneously was holding the Intercontinental and the European title. He went in to defend both of those belts against Jeff Jarrett. And this was when Mark Henry had returned. I think Mark Henry was on the shelf, either sent down to developmental or he was injured. I can't remember which. He had made his return, and he was friends with D'Lo Brown. And when Deborah climbed up on the ring, distracting the referee, Mark Henry gets in the ring with Jeff Jarrett's guitar, seemingly to attack Jeff, and then he hits D'Lo instead, turning heel. The crowd is flabbergasted by that. This match opened the show. It was a great way to start the show. Jeff Jarrett gets the victory and I guess wins both titles. And they had another one of these Lions Den matches again. This time it's Ken Shamrock versus Steve Blackman, who had been feuding for a couple of months on TV. And so they did the same match that they did with Owen the year before, brought that stupid, ugly, octagon-looking monstrosity out there, and had Shamrock and Blackman wrestle in this thing. And if they didn't learn their lesson from the year before, that match really wasn't that great. And then they were going to do it again. So Shamrock wound up winning. It was really no big deal, and, not much to say about it. That's really all I think I'm going to mention about this pay-per-view. Chris Jericho actually made an appearance. This is another thing that I found odd at the time, because the SummerSlam is supposed to be their second biggest show of the year. Chris Jericho had just come into the company. He was only there for a couple of weeks. He had that humongously legendary debut with The Rock on Monday Night Raw. He was huge. We were all so excited to see him in the WWE. Now it's SummerSlam time. Okay, put him in the ring. Let's do something with him. Nope, he just cuts a fucking promo. To me, that was a strange decision. I don't know why they were holding off putting Jericho in the ring. That whole promo he cut at SummerSlam with the Road Dogg, I think, could have been done on Raw, and you could have put Jericho in a match and have him beat someone. He's a new guy, right? He just got there, right? Aren't you supposed to put these guys in the ring with people that they can beat to get them over? I attended the very next pay-per-view in Charlotte, which was Unforgiven, and Jericho wrestled X-Pac that night. Why didn't you put that match on SummerSlam? It could have been good. Who knows what the fuck they were thinking. I really don't rank this particular SummerSlam that high. SummerSlam 1999 was not one of my favorites, but at the same time, it did have a few memorable things take place, and I really liked its theme song, actually. I actually chose that song to open this video at the beginning. I actually attended SummerSlam 2000, Raleigh, North Carolina. This was a good SummerSlam, a very fun show to go to. On paper, it was stacked with a lot of great matches. I don't know if I'd put it on my top 5 or my top 10, but definitely a memorable show and one that I really, really enjoyed. We had amazing seats for this, and I remember this was one of those long weekends that I would do all the time. Not only was I at SummerSlam, but we also went to the house show the night before, Monday Night Raw the night after, and the SmackDown tapings the night after that. So this was one of those long strings of 4 or 5 shows in a row that I would go to with a group of friends back then during the Attitude Era. It was a great time. And I remember being really happy that I was there live to see, like the TLC match. That was the first time I had seen guys take table bumps, up close. Also, Shane McMahon took that incredible bump from the top of the SummerSlam scaffolding all the way down during his hardcore match with Steve Blackman. But the main event was a triple threat match. The Rock was WWE Champion defending against Triple H and Kurt Angle. Kurt Angle and Triple H were involved in a storyline that I really liked with Stephanie McMahon. She was starting to show a little bit of interest in Kurt Angle, and it was making Triple H jealous. It started causing all sorts of problems when Kurt got in the middle of this. I think he had some tag matches with Triple H. Things weren't working out. There was definitely some tension there between these two heels. And they were both going to be going after the WWE title in the triple threat match against The Rock. Now, what happened in this match was pretty interesting. Kurt Angle got hurt. WWE did one of my least favorite spots is when two big guys climb up on the table and stand on it attempting to do a spot there. I always hold my breath anytime Triple H tries to do a pedigree on the table or anytime Kane tries to do a tombstone on the table. I just don't know how these pieces of shit can hold these gigantic heavy wrestlers without collapsing. And this is one of these situations where the table collapsed. It has happened a few times, and Kurt Angle landed right on his fucking face, and I think he got a concussion, and he was knocked out, basically. Now, in the live crowd, because there was no commentary, I definitely thought that Kurt Angle was legitimately hurt because they were taking him away. The doctors were leading him off. And I remember when he came back and he got in the ring and he started just going 100 miles an hour. He ended up putting on a great performance that night, and he was half out of his mind, and he was brand new. He was a new guy, a rookie, essentially. I mean, Angle hadn't even completed his first full year in the WWE yet, if you minus out his developmental and dark match bullshit. He had just come in, and now he's in the main event of a major pay-per-view. He gets knocked unconscious and still comes back and performs at just as high a level as The Rock and Triple H were. And it saved the match. It was good. No title change this year. This year we got a babyface champion, and The Rock retained it. And, it was an okay main event. Not one of the best in SummerSlam history, but definitely good, and definitely pretty amazing considering what Kurt Angle went through. Like I said, the TLC match was on this thing too. I believe this was the first one between the Hardys, Edge and Christian, and the Dudley Boys. And it was so crazy to see some of these spots they were doing. When you see these bodies falling through tables, in the live audience, it is so different, I think, than seeing it on TV. Even the bumps sound different. You just hear this thud. And I'm almost glad, in a way, that these matches don't take place anymore. These things were so ridiculous and so over the top and so unnecessary and so taxing on the human body. I think wrestling fans, especially the PG haters and the people that have a thirst for the old days of the Attitude Era and the crazy style and the sick bumps, I think that's incredibly insensitive. I think it's selfish, and I think it's ignorant to want guys to go out there and kill themselves for the sake of your entertainment. A lot of these matches that took place back then are the reason why fans are, really a little bit less interested in wrestling now because, everything's just been devalued. These bumps are ridiculous. I worry for what guys like Mick Foley and Matt and Jeff Hardy and anybody that took really, really sick bumps are going to go through later on in life in their older years. Well, all their injuries and their broken bones, and not to mention, the possible head and brain trauma that they've suffered over the years. It's fucked up. I'm almost glad we don't see stuff like this anymore, but it sure as shit was entertaining. And this was an awesome match to see live. And what's interesting is, it's cool how much respect Edge and Christian wound up getting in their careers. Edge is a Hall of Famer. He had to retire. Everybody loves Edge and really always respected what he brought to wrestling, and he was definitely a huge star. Christian, same thing. Everybody respects Christian. Even the WWE does to an extent because they gave that guy the World Heavyweight title. He never made it to the heights that Edge did, but, still, for a guy like Christian to be world champion, I wouldn't have thought Christian could get to that point when he first came in. I wouldn't have thought Christian would ever be world champion. So the fact that Edge and Christian both got their due and got the respect from the WWE and the fans, near the end of their career, I think is great because back then, in 2000, let me tell you, the smarks of that generation hated Edge and Christian. Here's why. Because the Hardy Boys and the Dudley Boys were the ones taking all the crazy bumps. And all of these crazy ladder matches that they had, going all the way back to that first one with the Hardy Boys at No Mercy in 1999, through WrestleMania 2000, and now this TLC match at SummerSlam, Edge and Christian took the least amount of bumps, but won all of the matches. Now, granted, I know they didn't win that first one, but Edge and Christian were coming out on top of all of these other crazy matches that they were having with these two other tag teams, including the next year at WrestleMania when they did TLC 2 at WrestleMania 17, and Edge and Christian won again. But I didn't mind it. I mean, that's what heels do. The heels, are supposed to piss everybody off, so it's just so funny how the Smarks felt that Edge and Christian weren't worthy, of being tag team champions because the Hardys and the Dudleys were the ones stealing the show and yada, yada, yada. Years later, we all find out that Edge and Christian actually were stars and everybody loves and respects them, and they're both Hall of Famers and both former world champions. So the Smarks, like always, were wrong, and this was one of those early days of learning that. One of the matches I was most excited to see on the show was Chris Benoit and Chris Jericho. This was a 2 out of 3 falls match, and I was lucky enough to actually be able to witness several Chris Jericho versus Chris Benoit matches. I think I saw 3 or maybe even 4 matches between those two guys in the year 2000 alone. I remember being there for the Intercontinental title match they had on SmackDown. I think that was a couple of months before SummerSlam. The date is escaping me at this moment. I do know it was in the Richmond Coliseum, and I'm pretty sure Jericho won the belt from him. I actually can't remember who won the belt from who, but I know the IC title changed hands that night. I think I saw him wrestle 2 other times on house shows, and now here at SummerSlam, freshly off Fully Loaded. By the way, if you want to hear my review of Fully Loaded 2000, the month before this SummerSlam, check the description below. You'll find a link to it, and I might even put one on the screen as well. But those two guys just had huge matches at Fully Loaded. They were tested against the big boys. Jericho worked with Triple H and Benoit worked with The Rock. And now these guys were basically rekindling their feud. This was almost treated as, like a number 1 contenders match. Basically, the announcers were referencing that the winner of the match could be right back into the title picture. And it was 2 out of 3 falls. I mean, I was just excited as shit because our seats were really good. So this was one of those matches where I was looking forward to just settling in and watching the match. And I even remember telling my buddy, I said, don't talk to me during this match. Like, I just want to watch it. I just want to take it in. Because I really thought, other than the TLC match, of course, that it was going to be a show stealer. It was a good match, not the greatest match I've ever seen between the two of them, but definitely good. I think Chris Benoit won 2 falls to 1. I know that he won in the end by holding the ropes and stealing, the 3rd fall and rolling out of the ring, scooting out of the ring. So I just like that these guys, kept a pretty healthy rivalry for a long time. I mean, they were feuding earlier on in the year for the Intercontinental title. They took a break from each other while Benoit worked with The Rock and Triple H worked with Jericho. Then they came back to rekindle their feud again in SummerSlam. And a few months later at the Royal Rumble, they were at it again. Remember the ladder match for the Intercontinental title? One of my favorite matches of all time. I wish I could have seen that one live. That was awesome. And Undertaker and Kane, goddamn, you talk about an experience. Wow, I'm going to be able to witness an Undertaker versus Kane match? Well, I really didn't. The whole match was stupid. This was badass biker Undertaker. He had just returned to the WWE using this gimmick. He was now feuding with Kane, and the whole premise behind the match was he was going to unmask Kane. This was the first tease that one day they were going to unmask this guy. It took them, I think, over 3 more years to actually do it, but they were teasing this early on, and the Undertaker-Kane match, much to my disappointment, never even happened. I think it was just a brawl. The two guys were fighting. The match never even started, and Undertaker actually ripped off Kane's mask. And Kane gets out of the ring and kind of is hobbling to the back, covering his face, and between his hands covering his face and his hair, you really never even got a glimpse, of his face, maybe a little bit. But I thought it was kind of a waste to have these two, icons in the business have a match at the second biggest pay-per-view of the year, and you're using it as a way to further this angle of Kane possibly being unmasked, and then you never even go through with the fucking angle. They ultimately decided not to unmask Kane, and they waited a few years to do it, ultimately making this whole fucking SummerSlam match pointless, and it was a shame that these two guys never had an actual match with a winner or a loser. SummerSlam 2001. This was Invasion time. This was right in the middle of the Invasion angle. Now, looking back, I think we all agree that the WWE really dropped the ball on the Invasion. There are so many things, looking back now, that the WWE could have done that would have made that angle a million times better. But despite the fact that the Invasion angle is looked back at as a failure, the excitement for this year's SummerSlam was really high. I remember really looking forward to the show. It was basically going to be WWE versus the Alliance, or WCW, and ECW. Now, the Invasion pay-per-view had taken place the month before, and that's when Stone Cold turned heel. It was Team WWE versus Team Alliance. Stone Cold, who was really already a heel because he had turned at WrestleMania 17, had basically gone back to being a babyface for like 1 week. And then, of course, in the main event, he turns on the WWE, joining the Alliance. Of course, now you got a match between Stone Cold and Kurt Angle, who's now a huge babyface in the WWE. The Invasion angle got Kurt over as a babyface, and he was going to get the title match against Stone Cold. I liked the storyline they were doing with Angle and Austin back then. It was funny how they reversed roles. You know, a year before, Angle would have been the pussy and Stone Cold would have been the badass. Now it's reversed. I remember some of those promos they were doing on Raw. I don't remember if this was before or after SummerSlam, but Kurt Angle, you know, took Austin out to a bridge and tied him up, put a blindfold on him. Austin is crying and pleading for his life, and, you know, and then Angle pushes him in a little pool or something like that, making Austin look like an idiot. It's really funny how, you know, how times will change within the course of just 1 year. I think the fans were itching for Kurt to get a title change, but when you look back at the way this SummerSlam was structured, you know, Kurt actually, I think, won the title the next month at Unforgiven, but he came up short at SummerSlam. I believe it was a DQ, and the feud between those two guys was intense. It was almost like a Stone Cold versus Bret Hart Part 2. The WWE back then couldn't fucking figure out who they wanted to be a heel and who they wanted to be a face. So much was changing so rapidly. You know, Kurt Angle got the big victory, beating Stone Cold at Unforgiven, the big celebration with his family, crowd going nuts, all that shit. I think a month later, he wound up turning heel and wound up joining the Alliance and aligning himself with Stone Cold after he lost the belt back to him right after he won it. And then just a couple of months after that, Austin was back being a babyface. So the whole Invasion just, you know, threw WWE's creative plans all over the place. I don't think these I think were the beginning days of WWE really writing shows on the fly. I think before this, they really had their shit together. You know, when they were combating WCW, they had long-term plans laid out. The internet really wasn't, you know, even though it was there, it wasn't spoiling as much as it currently does now. And I just basically think they really had their ducks in a row back then. But during this Invasion angle, it seemed as if the WWE couldn't decide which fucking direction they wanted to go. And since Kurt Angle came up short at SummerSlam against Austin, you knew that meant The Rock was going to be able to beat Booker T for the WCW title. This was interesting because for the first time ever, I mean, this was SummerSlam. This was a WWE pay-per-view, and the main event is for the WCW title. To me, that was so fucking surreal. I mean, I lived through the Invasion and the WCW versus WWE war for years and years and years this went on. And, you know, here this company, just a few months after the buyout, they're putting their title as the main event of their second biggest pay-per-view of the year. Now, I think it just had to be that way because, you know, back then the WWE was still very into having, you know, big pay-per-views close with a happy moment. So if they weren't going to be giving the belt to Angle and The Rock was going to be beating Booker T for it, it made more sense that match should close the show. Plus, The Rock was recently back. He had taken a little bit of time off to go do, I think, The Mummy, and then he came back right in the middle of the Invasion angle and aligned with WWE. He got the title shot against Booker T and ended up beating him, and the WWE now has the WCW title in their camp. So the Alliance had the WWE title, and the WWE had the Alliance title. But still, it was a good way to close the show, and I remember watching the match, too. I went back and watched it again just a little while ago, but you can check out the tape. It's so funny, you know, Booker T came from WCW. He was, even though Booker T's a hell of a worker, you know, he was very inexperienced in the WWE style, and he's on a big stage against a great worker like The Rock, and, you know, he was going to have to basically listen to what The Rock told him. And at the very end of the match where they do the spot, I think Booker T hits The Rock with something. The Rock is laying there, and Booker T is basically supposed to do the spin-a-rooney or something like that. Rock nips up and hits him with the rock bottom. Well, Booker T almost fucks it up, and he hits Rock with the move. The Rock is down. He starts crawling over to The Rock to pin him, and you hear The Rock going, "No, Booker, no. No, Booker, no." And Booker T immediately stops and goes into his spin-a-rooney deal, and that's when The Rock gets up and hits him with the rock bottom and wins the match. So it's kind of interesting how, you know, the WCW guys, even though all of them were very capable workers, you know, they didn't, the WWE style and just what they did, you know, things they did in the ring and how, you know, how well thought out things were and finishes were, you know, was completely different to the cluster fucking WCW. So Booker T was, you know, thrown right to the Lions right away. You know, he was thrust right into the main event picture. He was the biggest star that the Alliance had. Hogan and Goldberg and Nash and Hall and Flair, none of those guys came over during the Alliance angle. Booker T was it. So a lot was asked of Booker T right up front as soon as he got there. He was working with The Rock. He was working with Kurt Angle. He was working with Stone Cold. He was working with everybody right off the bat. A lot of people say that Booker T was mistreated in the WWE and this and that. You know, I don't don't think so. If you ask me, Vince McMahon held a grudge against WCW for what they almost put him through, so he could have easily buried Booker T. He didn't. Booker T was involved in major storylines and worked with top guys throughout his whole career. It doesn't matter if you lose a match here or there that maybe the fans feel like you should have won. Bottom line is Booker T was a top guy and he was making top guy money. Booker T has worked with fucking everybody. He even left and went to TNA and came back, and the WWE gave him an announcing job, a GM job, and put him in the Hall of Fame. Explain to me how Booker T was ever buried. But that's beside the point. I've been getting off subject enough in this SummerSlam commentary, and this thing's going to wind up being 5 hours long if I don't put the pedal to the metal here. But those are really the only memorable things about 2001, was the two big title matches, the Invasion storyline that was going on. Edge did win the Intercontinental title, that old SummerSlam tradition of the IC title changing hands. It was still alive and well. Edge beat Lance Storm for it, and this was actually the tease of Edge and Christian's eventual split, and I think Christian joined the Alliance and became a heel. All that was starting to be teased during this match, but Edge did beat Storm and won the Intercontinental title, and Jeff Hardy and Rob Van Dam actually had a ladder match at this pay-per-view as well, which was really good. And the Chris Jericho versus Rhino match was also very good, and that's when Chris Jericho and Stephanie were really in the middle of their heated feud. That was great shit, too. SummerSlam 2002 is in my top 5 for sure. I think that's pretty much the consensus amongst most wrestling fans. They all rank this SummerSlam really, really high. The main event was awesome. Brock Lesnar versus The Rock. The Rock was kind of on his way out, transitioning into movies. Brock Lesnar was literally the next big thing, and these two guys were athletically at their peak. And this was man versus man. And they set it up beautifully. I remember all the vignettes they were running with the two guys, working out, preparing for the match. You could really see just what beasts they were. And Brock Lesnar was on fire. He had just come into the WWE. He had been there a matter of months. He had already won the King of the Ring. He had the great match where Hulk Hogan put him over on SmackDown. I think Brock Lesnar beat Hulk Hogan with the bear hug. He beat him with the same move that Andre the Giant could not beat Hulk Hogan with at WrestleMania 3. He literally squeezed the life out of Hulkamania and then rubbed the blood on his chest. It was fucking awesome. And he goes in there with The Rock in front of a New York crowd. The crowd that turned on The Rock in this match were giving him so much shit. This is where you started hearing the Rocky sucks chants. Here it is, heel versus babyface, and the fans were cheering for the opposite. And when The Rock finally put Brock over, and Brock countered the rock bottom, picked him up, nailed him with the F5 for the pin and the victory, the crowd went nuts. I loved it. It was one of my favorite SummerSlam main events ever. We saw the true launching of a new star, a guy that was actually over. Brock Lesnar came in. There was no one like him. He was a legitimate athlete. He was a legitimate wrestler. And as we found out later in life, he was a legitimate fighter. There has not been another guy to ever come along like Brock Lesnar, that truly has it all. He is a believable champion. In wrestling, you want things to be as believable as possible, and that's why Brock Lesnar is one of my favorites, because he legitimately looks like he could kick the shit out of anybody on the planet. Where you think of previous world champions, did Shawn Michaels ever look like he could kick the shit out of anybody? No, he was actually 0 for life in any physical fight that he had ever been in. Brock was for real, and Brock meant business, and the WWE was proud to have a champion like that, because even UFC guys were scared of this guy. He was so good back then. When he first came in, Brock was so young. Brock's still good now, but the agility that he had when he was young, I think he was only 25 years old when he won this title. He was just in unbelievable shape, and the things he could do in the ring for a guy as big and strong as him were unbelievable. Brock, that 2002 Brock Lesnar is one of my favorite wrestlers of all time. Seriously, he is. Speaking of Shawn Michaels, by the way, since I was just making fun of him for never winning any fights, he won a fight on this SummerSlam, a great street fight with Triple H. Shawn made his return, 4.5 years off after a back injury after WrestleMania 14. He was still going through all of his fucking personal issues and his demons. He had worked them out. He had become a changed man. Granted, it was early. He had only found religion and this new way of life for about a year, but he felt like he was ready to come back. And when he came back, I'll be goddamned if it didn't look like he ever took a day off to begin with. I talk about how athletic Brock was. Shawn was unbelievable. Here he takes a half a decade off and he comes back, and you wouldn't have known that he took a half a decade off. That was an awesome match with Triple H, and I'm so glad that Shawn came back and redeemed himself, in his life and his wrestling career. He came back that night at 2002 and wrestled for another 8 years. So this was a glorious day for me, for other wrestling fans, to see a completely rehabilitated Shawn Michaels coming back into the business, to re-enter the life that he left and be a completely different person and a completely different type of wrestler, coming back in than he was when he was there previously. And, you talk about redemption, Shawn definitely did with me. On paper, this SummerSlam was stacked too. Listen to some of these matches. Edge versus Eddie Guerrero, Chris Benoit versus Rob Van Dam, Chris Jericho versus Ric Flair, and a great opening match between Kurt Angle and Rey Mysterio. I remember the crowd energy for that opening match was unbelievable. The electricity, the tension, the excitement, the flashbulbs. I mean, the pyro just got done going off. The fans were jacked. And Rey Mysterio makes the sneak attack entrance on Kurt Angle, getting him from behind. And the two of them, end up having what turns out to be an amazing, fast-paced, high acrobatic match together. It was awesome. This SummerSlam from top to bottom was stacked and definitely one of my favorites. Well, we're up to 2003 now. Are you guys still with me? Here we go. Home stretch. Only 10 more SummerSlams left. But 3 matches in particular I do remember from this card that I really like. The 2 world title matches, because by this point, unlike 2002, they had now split the titles. As a matter of fact, the night after SummerSlam 2002 was when they introduced the World Heavyweight title and gave it to Triple H. He had held that thing basically the whole year. I think he gave it up to Shawn for a month or so and ended up having it pretty much the whole time. So now we're up to SummerSlam 2003. Goldberg has come into the company, and the main event is going to be an Elimination Chamber. I think this was the second one they did. The first one was at Survivor Series the previous year. Now there's another one, and the participants are Triple H, Shawn Michaels, Kevin Nash, Goldberg, Randy Orton, and Chris Jericho. Now there's a lot of controversy involved in this match amongst the wrestling community. A lot of people look back at this as the night that the WWE killed Goldberg. Triple H was about as hated as he has ever been around this time, as far as, backstage stories go and things like that. All of the smarks hated this guy, felt that he was hogging the spotlight, holding people back. He had just married Stephanie, so naturally everybody's going to think that everything is just handed to Triple H. Forget the fact this guy was already a huge star before he even started dating Stephanie. They're all blaming his success on the relationship with Stephanie, which I've never agreed with. However, in this situation, I can see their argument, definitely, how, Goldberg had just come in. You're not going to bring in a star of this magnitude to not give him the title. This is the second biggest pay-per-view of the year, as I keep repeating, and they got this big-time, brand-new monster babyface that was huge in WCW, because remember, Austin is gone. The Rock is gone. We've moved on from those days of the Attitude Era. The Attitude Era is pretty much over. We've moved on to Kurt Angle and Brock Lesnar and Triple H. They're in charge of the show now. So you got Goldberg coming in now, seemingly to fill the void that The Rock left and that Stone Cold left earlier on in the year when Austin retired and Rock was pretty much done to do movies full-time. And you would think that this big moment for Goldberg should come at SummerSlam. Now, I don't even agree with the Elimination Chamber match. A lot of people say that, they fucked over Goldberg when he lost. But really, it wasn't that bad. It was a 6-person match. Triple H used a sledgehammer at the end to win, and then the entire faction of Evolution kicked the crap out of Goldberg and bloodied him after the match. Goldberg got his redemption and the match with Triple H at the next pay-per-view and did wind up winning the world title. So I guess I can see both sides of it here. I really didn't mind the finish of the match because a lot of people were expecting Goldberg to win, and the nice swerve at the end where Triple H survives yet another pay-per-view. This guy had been world champion forever, and for sure he's going to drop it to the brand new Goldberg who's just come into the company, right? He hit him with the sledgehammer and pinned him, and then they kicked his ass after the match. Now Goldberg got his revenge, the very next month and won the world title. So if you ask me, they should have done that match at SummerSlam and fucked the whole Elimination Chamber. It should have just been one-on-one, Goldberg versus Triple H. But just like I talked about in 1999, Triple H was a victim of the exact same type of shit that fans were accusing him of here in 2003. So it's just the nature of the business. It's just the way shit goes. I don't think it's fair to completely blame what happened to Goldberg on Triple H because you know what? I don't give a shit about Goldberg. I really never liked the guy. He had one good, hard, solid year. And don't get me wrong, he was a megastar, and he was new, and he was different, and he was fresh. But I think the guy is a fucking asshole. I think deep down, Goldberg really doesn't have the respect for the business that he should. I think he's very cocky. I think he's very arrogant. And I think he puts himself on the level of a Sting or a Hogan or a Rock or an Austin, and he is not. Not even fucking close. He was world heavyweight champion in WCW when he was greener than John Cena's t-shirt. But that could be a whole nother subject. I could do a whole commentary on Bill Goldberg and his career. And remember, he was in WCW, and all of the bullshit that was going on behind the scenes in that company with these fucking inflated contracts and these egos and creative control and all of this nonsense coming from all of their major stars over there. Nobody was in charge, and the inmates are running the asylum. So Goldberg was only doing what he had been experiencing in pro wrestling. That's the way he was taught. So if everyone else around you is walking around like they're king shit with a huge ego and think that they're larger than life, then Goldberg might as well do it too, because he drew a ton of money, he brought in a ton of merchandise, and he was WCW's version of Stone Cold. He was just what they needed to stay afloat. You know, had it not been for Goldberg, I think WCW would have gone out of business about a year prior to this. I think Goldberg kept their head above water during this time. So I'm not saying Goldberg was completely useless, but I never fucking liked the guy. So if you ask me if Triple H, you know, did something shady to, you know, fuck up Goldberg's moment at SummerSlam 2003, who fucking cares? Goldberg was in the WWE for 1 fucking year. They had to pay him like crazy. It took them years to negotiate to bring him in. He didn't want to come in during the invasion angle. He wanted to sit on his ass and make his money and do fucking nothing. So why would you care if a guy like Goldberg got fucking screwed? Fuck him. And Triple H still put him over, like I said, at the next pay-per-view. These guys had some real life heat. You know, there was some issues between the two of them when Goldberg was in WCW. I can't even remember what the story is now, but something was said, I think, in an interview. I think it was from Triple H, because Triple H was very immature back then, and he would say whatever the hell he wanted, and he ran his mouth about Goldberg, and then the two of them happened to be in the same place at the same time, some sort of a convention a couple of months later, and I think Goldberg approached him, and I think they had a few words. I don't think any punches were thrown or anything like that, but they definitely had some heat. So for Triple H to be able to work with him and put him over, you know, I don't think is all that bad. So Triple H won a match he probably shouldn't have at SummerSlam 2003. Well, you know what? They shouldn't have the fucking Elimination Chamber match to begin with. It should have just been one-on-one, which it was the next month, and Goldberg won. So this is another situation where I cannot just blindly blame Triple H for this. Yes, I can see the argument. Definitely I can see the argument. But when you look at it more deeply, you have to wonder, would people be saying the same thing if it was anybody else other than Triple H that had done that to Goldberg, or are they just saying it because it was Triple H and because he is so widely hated amongst the smarks across the board, and they just go along with what everybody else says? When you actually look at these situations, I think there are two sides to every fucking story. And it is just too fucking easy for these know-it-all fans to say, oh, he held him back, oh, he held him down, oh, he's always hogging the spotlight. You know, that's just the same old fucking nonsense that just spews out of everybody's mouth. Take a look at the situation and look at it and try to develop an unbiased opinion about it. That is something that the fucking wrestling fans have an incredibly hard time doing. But anyway, this is a SummerSlam Memories fun commentary. I'm not here to fucking toss shit on the smarks, although they do fucking annoy me. The other world title match was Brock Lesnar taking on Kurt Angle. Kurt Angle was the WWE champion. Remember, this was just months after WrestleMania 19, where Brock Lesnar had the big moment. He won the main event of WrestleMania 19 as the babyface, won the world title. Fast forward just 5 months later, you got Kurt Angle's the babyface now. Brock is a heel. He's aligned himself with Vince McMahon, and he lost the title to Kurt Angle, I think, in the pay-per-view before SummerSlam. So this is basically a WrestleMania rematch. Kurt Angle defends the WWE title against Brock Lesnar. And guess what? Brock Lesnar tapped out. It's still surreal to go back and watch that. I loved those days of Kurt Angle versus Brock Lesnar and all the matches they had. That was great shit. That is two legit fucking stars right there. Those are two guys that can kick the shit out of people in real life, and they're having great matches in the WWE. It was awesome. And it's pretty unbelievable how dominant Brock Lesnar was, you know, when Kurt Angle made him tap out like that. I mean, he dominated The Rock the year prior and was launched onto the scene, and here we are 1 year later at SummerSlam 2003, and he's tapping out to Kurt Angle. So much can change throughout the course of 1 year. It's unbelievable, and I believe it's the only blemish on Brock Lesnar's SummerSlam record. He only worked two before he left, and now that he's come back, he's beaten Triple H and CM Punk, and most likely he's going to beat John Cena. So he's really only had one loss, and that was it, when Kurt Angle made him tap out to the ankle lock. The rest of the matches on this pay-per-view were pretty typical run-of-the-mill stuff they would do back then, but one match was interesting, was Shane McMahon versus Eric Bischoff. Kane was involved in this thing too. He had just recently unmasked, and he was taking on Rob Van Dam at SummerSlam later on in the card. Stone Cold was involved in this as well. I believe this was when he was co-general manager with Eric Bischoff. They were kind of feuding on TV. Austin actually, I think, tricks Eric Bischoff somehow into signing up for a match with Shane McMahon at SummerSlam. I believe it's no holds barred. And there's a lot of, family drama in this, too. Eric Bischoff actually corners Linda McMahon at Vince's house, I think, and plants a big kiss on her. I remember Eric Bischoff kissing Stephanie, too. It amazes me that Vince McMahon would do that with Bischoff. You know, this guy who he's brought into his company to play a character, but who in real life was working his balls off trying to put Vince out of business. Eric Bischoff wanted to kill the WWE and Vince McMahon and the rest of his wrestlers' livelihood. And here he is putting this guy on TV and having him him make out with his wife and his daughter. I mean, just unbelievable. Vince just doesn't give a fuck, does he? But the match, what can you expect from Eric Bischoff and Shane McMahon in the ring? Eric Bischoff doesn't know what the fuck he's doing, but Shane's not bad. Shane's always been a great athlete. The match was pretty good, and the match saw the heel turn of Jonathan Coachman, the coach. I think he's just a regular commentator at this point. He leaves the announce table and attacks Shane McMahon, and then Bischoff and Coach continue to double team Shane until Austin comes out to the ring and helps Shane McMahon kick the crap out of those two guys. Shane McMahon does the big table spot where he jumps off the top rope and elbow drops Bischoff through the table. Fucking crazy dangerous bump that Shane has taken I don't know how many times, but pretty entertaining match all in all, and for the most part this SummerSlam was okay. Definitely not a top 10 SummerSlam for me, but not bad either. Well, unfortunately for Randy Orton, he can never go back and truly enjoy the night that he won the World Heavyweight title for the first time, because in SummerSlam 2004, he challenged Chris Benoit for the World Heavyweight title. We all know the circumstances surrounding Chris Benoit. We've talked about it a lot. At least you can still go back and watch him on the WWE Network. But as far as what you see on TV, I don't know if the WWE will really ever mention him again other than, a little accidental thing here and there. But Benoit had the big victory at WrestleMania 20, beating Triple H and Shawn Michaels in the triple threat match, making Triple H tap out, winning the World Heavyweight title, and embracing with Eddie Guerrero after the match. Just such a fucking beautiful moment. Well, time to drop the belt now, Chris. And WWE had their eye on Randy Orton as their next big star. They had kind of had their eye on him late in 2002. I think they recognized his potential. I think they recognized his similarities to The Rock, a big, tall, good-looking kid, in great shape, third-generation wrestler, seems to have all the tools. I think they really had him in mind as their next big thing. I think they had him higher on their list than they did John Cena. And as a matter of fact, I remember there was a backstage interview with Randy Orton at this SummerSlam, and John Cena interrupted him. It was one of the very first early interactions between John Cena and Randy Orton. That was 10 years ago. Cena, who at the time was in full-on Thugonomics mode, I think was just kind of messing with Randy Orton a little bit and said something funny to him and walked off or whatever. But pretty interesting, little exchange. One of the very first face-to-face interviews the two of them would have. And if we would have known that was going to be the first of 200 pay-per-view appearances together, I don't know if we would have liked it so much, but definitely you can trace it back as far as 2004's SummerSlam. But Randy Orton won the title that night. He was a member of Evolution, getting the title shot against Chris Benoit. He hit him with the RKO and pinned him and became the youngest ever World Heavyweight Champion. That was another motivating factor for the WWE to rush the Randy Orton launching, is because Brock Lesnar had just left the company. WrestleMania 20 was his last night. He had the distinction up till that point of being the youngest world champion ever. So the WWE wanted to quickly erase that, put the belt on Randy Orton while he was still younger than Brock was as soon as possible. Eddie Guerrero had also lost his title. He had already lost it, I think, the month before, and he had a WrestleMania rematch with Kurt Angle. This time no titles are on the line, and it was basically probably just Eddie's way of giving back to Kurt for Kurt putting him over at WrestleMania. And this time when Kurt Angle locked in the ankle lock on Eddie Guerrero's bootless foot, there was no escaping it, and Eddie tapped out. I remember the newly returned Undertaker, the dead man, got the title shot against JBL, who had beat Eddie Guerrero for the title, I think at the month prior at the Great American Bash, whenever that was. And this match was kind of shit. I really didn't enjoy it. It ended up in a disqualification victory for JBL, and they did a really hokey spot. I mean, it was kind of cool the way Undertaker just beat the crap out of JBL. He was completely bloodied, but then they took it one step too far, and they did a terrible-looking limousine chokeslam where Undertaker chokeslammed JBL through the roof of the limousine, and of course it was gimmicked, and he falls right through it. They've done this so many times, even recently in the last couple of years with John Cena throwing Ryback through the top of the ambulance, and it looked like it was a spot that took a lot of effort, and it was a spot that never paid off. I think the entire angle and the entire storyline would have gotten over just the same as it was had it not even been for that spot. I think one of the biggest disappointments for me on this year's SummerSlam was, the lack of payoff in the Eugene versus Triple H match. I thought that match sucked. I actually liked the build-up. I was not a fan of the Eugene character. I was not a fan of them having a guy pretend to be retarded. I thought it was stupid and insensitive, but nonetheless, Nick Dinsmore was doing a great job with the character. And instead of being a Santino or a Funaki, which is what he would become, shortly after this, they were actually involving him in big storylines with the WWE's one of their biggest stars in Triple H. Triple H basically befriends gullible Eugene on TV to try to get him to help him win back the World Heavyweight title, and when that fails, he turns on Eugene and beats the fucking crap out of him. The entire faction of Evolution completely beat Eugene bloody, and they also beat up William Regal, who's Eugene's friend, and they even did the spot where I think Triple H broke into William Regal's hotel room and kicked the crap out of him, and then cut a promo with him sitting next to a bloodied William Regal on Eugene. I mean, it just looked like the match was gonna, it was gonna be violent. It was gonna be crazy. We were gonna see a different side of Eugene. It was gonna be uncomfortable at times. It was basically just gonna be high drama. I was looking forward to the match, and the match sucked. With all of the heat and all of the build going into this match, you thought that this match had to be intense. It had to be extreme. It had to be violent. Not one drop of color was shed in this whole fucking match. I think both guys should have been split ear to ear if you followed the storyline up until this match. Plus, this is such a big pay-per-view, you would think it just has to deliver, and it did not deliver. Triple H won, and it was actually very boring. I also remember the Kane and Matt Hardy match. I think the stipulation in this is that if Kane won, he gets to marry Lita. This is what led to the wedding. Lita eventually, my memory's a little hazy around this time, but I know she eventually wound up staying with Kane. She was reluctant at first, and he was being evil towards her. But she wound up falling for him, I guess, and stayed with him. And then after that, I think she turned on him and was with Edge. And we'll be talking about Edge and Matt Hardy again at next year's SummerSlam. Also, when I mentioned John Cena earlier on when he interrupted Randy Orton's promo, he had a best-of-5 series with Booker T for the United States title. And at SummerSlam, they did match number 1. I kind of went back and took a peek at the match because I couldn't remember who won. And John Cena beat Booker T in about 5 minutes. Very short match. But John Cena was hugely over. I mean, he was fucking huge. Fans were going nuts for him. You had 20,000 little fucking chain gangers out there. Now those same exact people think this guy that they were cheering their asses for all of a sudden can't wrestle anymore and is ruining the business. What the fuck ever, you little fickle fucks. SummerSlam 2005 is the only SummerSlam of the modern era that I have really fond memories of and strong opinions about. This was a really interesting SummerSlam, to be honest with you. When you look at the card, when you look at some of the matches that took place, and when you look at some of the backstories of some of the matches, it's very, very interesting. Things start going downhill rapidly for me after this SummerSlam. A couple of months later, when Eddie Guerrero died, I really took my eyes off the product for a couple of years. All I basically did was maybe order 2 pay-per-views that year, eyeball wrestling news sites, and, just pay attention to results of big shows, and that's it. I actually rarely even watched Raw. I usually just caught the results online. And 2005 was also actually the final year that I taped Monday Night Raw every single week. From 1993 until 2005, I set my VCR, and I had about 12 years of full Monday Night Raw seasons personally taped off of television by me. And 2005 was finally the year where I said to myself, you know what, this shit is getting too hard to keep track of. Everything is blending together. And all of the shows and the Raws and the pay-per-views to me at the time were just becoming less meaningful. And I actually just stopped recording Monday Night Raw after that year. But this year's SummerSlam, I have to say, was very interesting and very intriguing. Even though I was starting to get a little sour on the product, I was really into what was going on at this pay-per-view. We have to start with the main event, right? A ton of controversy surrounding Hulk Hogan and Shawn Michaels. I have made my feelings known about this in the past. I really had a bad taste in my mouth. I always have about Hulk Hogan. There's a lot of things about him that severely piss me off. I've tried to make a point not to trash Hulk Hogan anymore. Yes, I've got my issues with him. Yes, I've got my issues with a lot of guys, but I'm not going to come up here and make commentaries talking about what a fat fucking piece of shit that he is. I've already done that. And I think all of us as wrestling fans, we learned a lot this past year during the Ultimate Warrior's passing, and how, life is too short to hold grudges on bullshit and things like that. And, I for one can admit totally to the success and the legendary status of a character like Hulk Hogan, what he has contributed to the business, how he helped save wrestling in the 80s, just like Stone Cold helped save it in the 90s. Hogan is a household name. No one can ever take that away from him, and definitely, regardless of the fact whether or not he can work in the ring, he is the biggest star in the history of the business. That can't be debated. But even with that legendary status that he had, that Babe Ruth status, I thought it was wrong with what he tried to pull at SummerSlam 2005. I think long story short is that Hogan basically was wanting to change a lot in his contract. Vince McMahon, for some reason, after Hogan working for so many years against Vince, working with WCW to try to put the WWE out of business, Vince not only brings Hogan back, but he gives him the exact same type of bullshit contract stipulations that Hogan got in WCW and how he got in the WWE previously. The very thing that the WWE was rallying against during the Attitude Era, against, this big corporation like WCW who has these inflated contracts and these fat, lazy, egotistical wrestlers that are impossible to do business with. The WWE locker room was completely the opposite. They were all for one, they were one for all, they were on the same team, and they were united, against this big, huge, WCW corporation full of all these useless wrestlers. And here comes Hulk Hogan waltzing in the door, with all of these fucking demands. And I guess whatever happened, I don't even remember the specifics on it now, but Hogan just did not like the direction of the storyline for whatever reason. And Hogan, I believe what the story was, is wanted the match to be a heel versus face, where I think they originally planned this to be a big babyface match. Two of the greatest of all time, Shawn Michaels challenging Hulk Hogan, with the story being Shawn Michaels just wants to know. I just need to know who's the best. To me, that's all you needed for SummerSlam. And I think Hogan, being the smart businessman that he is, was smart enough to see the writing on the wall in that situation and said, hey, if I go into SummerSlam in a babyface match against Shawn Michaels, I'm probably going to get booed. Because Shawn Michaels, since his return to the WWE in 2002, has been stealing the show every single fucking night, always the best match on the card, and still, at his age and at this time period in the WWE, I believe he was the best in-ring worker the WWE had. The fans respected the shit out of Shawn, and Hogan knew it, and he knew that if he was going to go into SummerSlam, he wasn't going to get the Hulkamania cheers that he used to. I mean, he still get the nostalgic cheers. People still liked to cheer for Hogan, but when you're looking at what kind of match you're going to have in the ring, Hogan is old, he's broken down, he's got a couple of artificial body parts, and he's a fucking mess in there. The guy couldn't even really work in his day, much less when he's in his fucking 50s with artificial hips and shit, and he's getting in the ring with the best worker in the business. Hogan's not dumb, and he knew that he was going to look like a fool, if it was a babyface match. So he pulled this creative control bullshit and says, hey, it needs to be heel versus face. Shawn, who had been a babyface ever since he comes back, just basically has to turn heel for a month, and that's it. He kicked Hogan in the face on Raw. He did all those funny little promos leading up to the match at SummerSlam, the Larry King Live spoof and all that crap. He even trolled the Montreal crowd on Raw one night by calling out Bret Hart. They even played Bret Hart's music. So Shawn Michaels, for about 4 weeks there, got to, kind of expose a little bit of that old Shawn Michaels attitude that he used to have. And we got to see the old heel Shawn Michaels for just a few weeks. And the very next night, after SummerSlam, it was like it never happened. Shawn Michaels came out, cut a promo about the pay-per-view, and he was right back to being a babyface. Like it was nothing. Bada bing, bada boom. Okay, Hogan got his match. He's gone. He's not coming back for a while. Now we can resume business as usual, and Shawn, go right back to who you were being before you got mixed up in this crap with Hulk Hogan. Now, not to sound like too much of a hypocrite, because I have to realize that when I talked about SummerSlam 1999, I cited the Triple H Stone Cold versus Mankind match as a situation where Triple H was held down, screwed over, and fucked around. It wasn't fair what happened to Triple H that year at SummerSlam. He should have been in a one-on-one match with Austin, and he should have won the WWE title. And because of egos and because of guys not wanting to do business, things had to be changed to appease these big egomaniac stars. So when you look at the situation with Shawn Michaels, how much it had to piss him off to know that Hogan was not going to cooperate in this storyline, and it was causing a lot of unnecessary drama and tension, and Shawn was fuming. I mean, I know for a fact that even though Shawn is rehabilitated and Christian, that real Shawn Michaels still does lay inside of him. And I think he was seething mad, just furious at what Hogan was trying to pull, and I think that's why he oversold him so hard in the main event. But still, you have to think, back in the day, how many throats Shawn Michaels stepped on. How Shawn had no regard for anybody else's career, for anybody else's feelings, or for human life in general. He did not give a fuck. And there was most likely a lot of guys that Shawn Michaels also fucked out of opportunities because of ego or him demanding things go a certain way or whatever. So basically, just like I said a little while ago about Triple H, what goes around comes around. So all of the things that Shawn tried to pull on other people politically, now someone else was doing it to him. So I can't really feel that sorry for Shawn Michaels, because really, he just got what he deserved in the long run. But at the same time, it still pisses me off that Hogan did that when I don't even know why they were putting him in the ring with Shawn. Shawn is such an icon. This is a match that they could have saved for WrestleMania. And I'm not even necessarily saying that Shawn should win. I'm of the belief that he should win because he was the best in-ring performer in the history of the business. Yes, he's going up against the big icon star, but when you're comparing in-ring work, it's ice cream to horse shit. And I think they should have at least had a few matches where Shawn can at least win once. But the fact that this was one and done kind of pisses me off. And it was even worse next year in 2006, and we'll talk about that in a minute. So for the Hogan and Michaels situation, I can really see both sides of it. I'm so pissed off for what Hogan tried to pull, but then, like I said, with all the shit that Shawn Michaels pulled in his career, for it to happen to him years later, how can you really feel sorry for him? And the overselling, was hilarious. I got to admit, Shawn doing that to Hogan was so funny, basically making fun of Hogan's ridiculous moves. It was basically Shawn Michaels' way of showing Hulk Hogan how ridiculous he is. But despite the fact that it was hilarious, and despite the fact that Hogan deserved it, it was unprofessional. Shawn's a pro, arguably the greatest in-ring worker in the history of the business. He doesn't need to do that. He fucking knows better. But when you got a guy with as big an ego as Shawn, having another guy with a bigger ego fuck with him, that is fucking a recipe for disaster. And I think the bad blood might still loom. Here it is almost 10 years later, and I don't remember Hogan and Shawn doing anything else together ever since then. Even during WrestleMania 30 time, I remember they were supposed to be on Good Morning America or something like that together, and Shawn got taken off at the last minute. So I'm wondering if these guys just still fucking hate each other over this. But it was kind of a fucked up situation. The match was actually pretty good because Shawn's awesome, and he can carry a guy like Hogan. And I thought it was one of the best matches Hulk Hogan had ever had, really, at the age that he was. Hogan got a lot of color that night. He wound up beating Shawn with the ridiculous 3 punches, big boot, and the leg drop. And Shawn hilariously oversold all of it. And then they did the handshake at the end. Shawn confronts Hogan at the end of the match and just says, "I had to know." And they had kind of an intense handshake. I almost wonder if Hogan knew what Shawn was doing throughout the match and was a little bit pissed off at him too. Although when Hogan pinned Shawn, you can see him saying thank you. I think he whispered it in his ear, and he gave him a little pat on the chest right after the 3 count. So Hogan, might have been clueless to the whole thing and didn't even know what Shawn was doing. But they still had the handshake. Hulk Hogan still did the professional thing by thanking Shawn for, laying down for him and all of that. But it was a very interesting situation, very unique situation, and one that, looking back now was kind of funny. As much as I love Shawn Michaels and I hate what Hulk Hogan did that night, it's kind of like the pot calling the kettle black. Having Shawn being so upset with the crap that Hogan was trying to pull because Shawn used to be the same fucking way. But anyway, moving on, speaking of volatile situations, Matt Hardy and Edge had a match at this pay-per-view, and this was right after the Matt Hardy and Lita breakup when Lita cheated on Matt with Edge. This is all fucking real-life shit. I have not been to a WWE show in 9 years. One of the last shows I ever attended was in Raleigh, North Carolina for a SmackDown taping right before WrestleMania 21. And let me tell you, the cat was out of the bag. I don't even know if the cat was out of the bag on the internet yet. I don't know if fans knew what was going on between Lita and Edge and Matt Hardy, but the motherfucking fans in North Carolina sure as hell did. That was Matt Hardy's backyard. And the crowd was tearing Lita apart. I'm not even sure if I remember Lita being out there that night. I just remember chants of Lita is a slut and all this crap. If it was a SmackDown show, Edge and Lita might not have been on the show. Or maybe Edge was. Well, one of them was. I can't even remember now. But there was all sorts of "you screwed Matt" chants and "Lita's a slut" chants and all this stuff. The crowd was just fucking raging over this because I think news of all of this had just broken. If the internet didn't know about it yet, they were about to. And this was a real deal. Lita and Matt Hardy were a couple. And this was back when Edge had heat with the internet fans. I talked about earlier how him and Christian never got any respect during the TLC matches, where fans still didn't really like this guy around 2005. They thought he was a jerk-off. They thought he was like a Randy Orton type guy, with a big ego, and he's a snotty motherfucker, and here he is stealing another guy's girlfriend, and he's just a dirty bastard. To me, I don't care. This is what happens when you mix girls in the locker room. It just happens all the fucking time. It's going to happen. It's not the first time it's happened. It's definitely not the last. But what was so interesting about this is that it got really heated. Matt Hardy, he's a country boy. I'm from the parts where Matt Hardy is from. I know how those people are. And I think some of Matt Hardy's close friends were ready to fuck Edge up if they got the chance, So people were kind of out for Edge, and people were really defending Matt Hardy. The internet wrestling fans were behind him. Most wrestlers were behind him, and Matt Hardy had a lot of friends behind him too. And the WWE foolishly, in order to cool off this whole situation, who do they release? They release Matt Hardy. This is the typical type of shit that the WWE does, how at the end of the day they don't give a shit about anybody except themselves. They decide that these people have to be separated and they have to be released, but Matt Hardy would be a better guy to release than Edge because we don't want to lose Edge. Forget the fact that he's the cause of all this. We're going to keep him around because he's a big star for us who makes money and he's unreleasable. Matt Hardy, while he's a decent-sized roster member, will basically be fine without him. And if he wanted to go leave and go over to TNA or whatever, no big deal. We don't give a shit. Well, the fans fucking lost it. Just like they lost it when Daniel Bryan would be released 5 years later. They lost it when Matt Hardy was released. The outrage and the outpouring of support for Matt Hardy was so strong. I mean, WWE felt the pressure right away, and I think it was only a matter of weeks and they brought Matt Hardy back in. And what the most interesting thing about this is they made a storyline out of it. I mean, that would just be so incredibly hard to do. If I was in Matt Hardy's shoes, or Edge's shoes, or Lita's shoes for that matter, I do not think I would be able to go through with this. It would be so hard to go out there and have a fake fight with the guy that stole my girlfriend. How in the fuck can you possibly act professional out there? How the hell did Matt Hardy not tear Edge's head off when they started working a program together? I would have loved to be a fly on the wall in that fucking conversation when Lita and Matt Hardy and Edge all sat down together and hashed things out in a fucking hotel room. Or maybe it was at a WWE show, wherever the hell it was. Vince might have even been involved in that, but they all got together and agreed to fucking do business. And although it makes for a great storyline, it could potentially make for great TV, I just think that would be incredibly hard to do and incredibly awkward for two guys that were friends. I mean, Matt Hardy and Edge were tight. They went to war together in all those TLC matches over the years. You know, they were brothers, you know, the Hardys and Edge and Christian, and this really tore the friendship apart. I don't think anything was ever the same again with Edge or Matt Hardy or Jeff Hardy for that matter, because Jeff, you know, was Matt's brother, and he held a little grudge against Edge as well. I'm curious to know where everybody stands in their lives now after all of this. Everybody is now married or just off on different relationships. Edge is married, I believe, to Beth Phoenix. Lita is off, obviously, probably with another boyfriend. And Matt Hardy, I'm pretty sure, is dating somebody. So now that this has been 10 years later, I wonder if all these, I wonder if they've ever talked, or I wonder what the relationship is between the three of them. If they have, I think Edge and Lita have a good relationship, despite the fact they're not together anymore. But I'm just wondering how much bad blood still exists to this day over this. Because this was a strange time. I remember when Matt Hardy showed up on Raw and attacked Edge backstage for the first time. I mean, they did a really good job of making you think for a second that that was legit. I think it could have been done a little bit better. I would have liked to see Matt Hardy, you know, maybe grab Edge over the barricade, you know, from the crowd or something like that, but instead of sneaking up on him in the backstage area. But when you saw him, I was relieved. I'm like, oh, thank God they're bringing Matt Hardy back in. And it also made you wonder if the whole fucking Edge and Lita affair was a work, because now Matt Hardy's coming in to attack Edge. They're bringing a behind-the-scenes story out in front of the camera now, and you had to wonder if the WWE made all this happen on their own. But obviously that wasn't the case. That was the real deal. Matt Hardy and Lita did break up, and she did cheat on him with Edge, and it was really fucked up. I remember hearing Matt Hardy tell the whole story, you know, in a shoot interview one time, all the gritty details about how he found out and how he was reading some text messages and how he accidentally saw Lita's phone and how she had to admit to him what she had done. And then he had some conversations with Stephanie and Vince and how he was released. And all of this crap was, you know, really interesting and just funny how love is and how dramatic things can really be in real life. And they tried to bring it out on TV, and it was okay. The SummerSlam match was just a brawl where Matt Hardy was just beaten into a bloody pulp and couldn't compete, couldn't defend himself anymore. The referee had to stop the match and award the victory to Edge. Now imagine that if you're Matt Hardy. Here my girlfriend leaves me in real life for another wrestler, a rival of mine on the WWE roster. Now I'm going to get rehired back, come into the company, have to work a program with the guy that took my girlfriend, and get my ass kicked by him. Man, that had to be hard to do, and man, I hope they were paying Matt Hardy good money for that. I think Matt Hardy did get one victory in the series of matches they had. I think he won a cage match or something like that with Edge, but what wound up happening after this feud went on for maybe a month or two, they finally did the loser leaves Raw match 1 week on TV. And that was a way for the feud to be blown off. Edge would get the victory, sending Matt Hardy over to SmackDown. That way all these guys are separated. I never liked the Eddie Guerrero versus Rey Mysterio ladder match storyline with Dominic, you know, up for grabs, Rey Mysterio's son. You know, the custody of this kid is going to be on the line in a match. This was really bad shit, and I hated it, and it was so unnecessary. It's fucking Rey and Eddie. Why are you adding wives and children to this thing? You don't need that shit. Just put these guys in there in a ladder match for a fucking title, and they'll tear the house down. I think a stupid storyline like this really took away from from what was a pretty good ladder match, but it was so wrapped up in all of the drama that, you don't realize that it actually was a good match. It was so unnecessary. You didn't need any of that shit. If you wanted to have a feud with Rey Mysterio and Eddie Guerrero, then just have a fucking feud with Rey Mysterio and Eddie Guerrero. All this other crap was just so unnecessary. This drama and these type of things, you need to save this for guys that lack in the ring. That way you can make up the storyline with other shit, to supplement, the lack of ring work you're going to get. But Eddie and Rey didn't need this at all. And I never liked it, and I thought it made things even more uncomfortable just a couple of months later when Eddie Guerrero died, and all of a sudden Rey Mysterio's got to be on TV now all crying, oh, my friend Eddie died. Hey, if this guy was really trying to steal your child in real life, you wouldn't give a shit if he died. One of my favorite moments on the pay-per-view, actually, was when Chris Benoit opened the show and made Orlando Jordan tap out in like 20 seconds for the U.S. title. That was pretty awesome. It was a really good way to kick off the show, and the fucking crowd popped hard for that. Randy Orton and Undertaker also had a WrestleMania rematch on this pay-per-view as well, and if you remember, Randy Orton won this match with help from his dad. Bob Orton came out there dressed up in some makeup and shit like that, distracting the Undertaker, allowing Randy Orton to get the win. And don't forget, we had 2 title matches on this SummerSlam. We've talked about so much else, haven't talked about either world title yet. Batista defended the World Heavyweight title, which he won from Triple H at WrestleMania 21. He was defending it against JBL at SummerSlam, and needless to say, Batista won. And this was also Chris Jericho's second to last night in the WWE. He got the title match against John Cena at SummerSlam. He would lose. He would come out the next night on Raw and challenge John Cena again for the title, and if he lost, he would leave the WWE. So this was kind of Chris Jericho's send-off. I like that he got a title match on a big pay-per-view, right before he left. Was very cool, and we knew it was temporary. I've mentioned before how Jericho trolled everybody the night after Raw. I think it was Tuesday. On Chris Jericho's website, there was a picture of him doing his pose underneath a TNA banner. And the only reason he did that was just to get the internet talking. That's it. He just liked fucking with people, and he just wanted to sit back and laugh at them for 2 years before he came back in 2007. SummerSlam 2006 was not nearly as controversial, but about as equally interesting. Our friend Hulk Hogan is back. This time, the top star that he's going to leg drop and pin is Randy Orton. I was just not a fan of these decisions back then. Don't get me wrong. I was fine with Hogan being back. I was fine with him being the iconic figure that the WWE was making him out to be. But to bring him in at his age, when he is clearly limited physically, and have him beating top stars on their roster, I thought was a stupid fucking decision. I don't mind him coming in for nostalgia. I don't mind him coming in to run off a cowardly heel, in the mid-card or something like that. But when he's going in there in big matches, on big pay-per-views, and beating top stars in the company, that's where I fucking draw the line. At least this match was not the main event. I think it was like 3rd or 4th match into the show. Hogan took on Randy Orton, and he fucking beat him. Not nearly as good as the match he had with Shawn the year prior, but equally as baffling, and Hogan got the big victory over, a bubbling, rising star like Randy Orton. And I mean, the match made sense. I guess I had no problem with the match because Randy Orton was doing the Legend Killer gimmick at the time, so it's only natural that he should be facing Hogan at some point because Hulk Hogan is the ultimate legend, and that would be an awesome name to be able to put on Randy Orton's t-shirt. But still, it was just personally bothering me that Hogan was winning those matches at that point in his career. No world title changes on this pay-per-view either, which was really interesting because they had 2 heel champions and both heel champions retained their belts. Booker T is the world heavyweight champion on SmackDown. Well, excuse me, King Booker. This is when he was doing the King Booker gimmick, which I hated. I think I hated King Booker worse than I hated G.I. Bro, if you can believe that. I was just not a fan. But anyway, he was world champion, defending the title against Batista, and the match ends in a disqualification. Sharmell gets involved, referee throws out the match, and Batista wins the match, but not the title. And in the main event for the WWE title, we saw the same thing. Edge is defending the title against John Cena, and Edge has Lita in his corner. Now, this is right off the heels of One Night Stand and Rob Van Dam's arrest for being pulled over with weed and all that shit. And they had to abruptly take the title off of RVD and I think suspend him for 30 or 60 days. I don't remember which. And I don't remember if Sabu was suspended also because he was in the car with RVD. He did have a match on SummerSlam against the Big Show, so Sabu's punishment I don't think was as heavy as RVD's, but RVD lost the belt and they had to put it back on Edge. And this was the time, the feud with John Cena, where, his father was getting involved. I think Edge even went to their house and slapped around John Cena's dad. So the feud was getting really personal, and I actually look back to these years of Edge and John Cena, and I did not completely hate this feud. It lasted a long time. It had been rekindled several times. I think a lot of fans were getting sick and tired of it, but when you look back, it was probably John Cena's best opponent, perhaps, or, as far as a long-term storyline goes, because the characters were so different. One guy was rock and roll, the other one was rap. One guy's a little edgy and a little more adult, and the other guy is more PG and more for kids. It was a natural type of, feud and storyline. And Edge beats Cena. The heel wins in the main event. Edge pulls out some brass knuckles. Lita actually jumps in the ring. Pretty great finish. John Cena's about to give the FU to Edge. Lita jumps in the ring and jumps on top of Edge, and John Cena's got both of them over his shoulders. He FUs Lita off of the top of Edge. Edge jumps down, pulls out the brass knucks, and nails John Cena in the back of the head. Hides the knucks and gets the pin for the 1-2-3, and the heel closes the show by retaining the WWE title. That is rare. We've seen it a few times, but it does not happen that often. And I remember being surprised and kind of disappointed about this SummerSlam because they did no title changes. Now, at the time, I was not so rabid on the Cena haters. I was actually, I think, most likely a fan of Edge in this feud over Cena. So I definitely wasn't upset that Edge won the match, if that's what any of you are thinking. I just thought that for SummerSlam, for such a big pay-per-view, how many times have I said it in the last 3 hours? Second biggest pay-per-view of the year, and they did nothing with the title belts. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. I'm just saying it's a little bit surprising. And remember last year when Edge and Matt Hardy and Lita brought their real-life feud onto TV into a wrestling angle? Well, they did it again this year. This time it's Ric Flair and Mick Foley. And this is also an I Quit match. Now, my memory is hazy as to why these guys were actually feuding on TV, but I do think it was all stemming from what each guy said about each other in their respective books. And this was real-life stuff. Ric Flair has been quoted many times in the past of saying that a guy like Mick Foley is nothing more than a glorified stuntman, and he's not half the wrestler that guys like Ric Flair and other great legends in the business are. And I think Foley and a lot of fans took offense to that, and Foley fired back a couple of times, and they basically had like a behind-the-scenes little feud going on. And I think it's something that Ric Flair actually really started. I mean, Mick Foley, I don't remember him ever saying anything bad about Ric Flair in the past. And here Ric Flair is saying that Mick Foley isn't as great and he's not the legend that everybody thinks he is. So I think basically because the buzz this was getting on the internet, how everybody was hearing about these problems, these personal problems between the two, the WWE maybe in an attempt to recreate what they did the year before with Matt and Edge, they approached these guys about bringing this into a wrestling angle. And I think they worked it out. Mick Foley and Ric Flair, I think, are cool today. They have no issues with each other. They got together in 2006 and says, hey, why don't we give the fans a good program? But this match was one that I actually didn't like. I thought it was a little bit over the top. I thought it was a little bit too hardcore. Mick Foley, after unretiring, had come back and had some really good hardcore matches with Randy Orton and Edge, and those were great. But, he just took it a little bit too far with this match with Ric Flair. I didn't like it because it was a hardcore I Quit match. This is Mick Foley's match. And Ric Flair came into Mick Foley's match and won it. Both guys were completely bloody, especially Ric Flair, just completely covered in blood from head to toe. I even remember him purposely rolling through the thumbtacks in this match near the end of the match when he was going to hit Mick Foley with the baseball bat. I mean, Flair is ridiculous. And Melina is involved in this thing for some reason as well. Now, Mick Foley, it's pretty well documented that he openly has a crush on Melina. I mean, this is a married man, which I've always thought was funny. He's just always really liked Melina. Well, they brought her into this storyline as well. Say, hey, since Mick Foley and Melina are good friends in real life, let's bring her out there. Mick Foley is basically the heel in this match, too, which I didn't like. And they ran the finish where, of course, Mick Foley will not give up. Neither will Ric Flair. Melina gets involved. She actually gets in the ring and is checking on Mick Foley and protecting him. Ric Flair comes up with a baseball bat wrapped in barbed wire. And when he goes to hit Melina, finally Mick Foley says, okay, I quit, seemingly to protect Melina. Now, I don't remember. You guys have to refresh my memory. Did these two guys work again? Did Flair and Foley work another match after this? I actually can't even remember, but it seems to me where they should have done something where they did a hardcore match and a wrestling match, have Flair win the wrestling, Foley win the hardcore, and then do a rubber match with some other fucking gimmick involved. I don't know. But for Ric Flair to go out there and beat Mick Foley in a hardcore match was not believable. We already had Hogan out there winning a match in his fucking 60s. Now we got Ric Flair doing it too. I can just remember not being a fan of that. Another match I wasn't hugely a fan of, surprisingly, was DX versus Vince and Shane McMahon. I did not like the new DX. To me, you could never recreate what they did in 1997 and 1998. It was impossible. I mean, Shawn and Triple H had not been on the same side in many years, so I guess it was at least cool to see that, to see them aligned together as a unit again. But the old DX and them coming out there to the music and trying to be hip and cool and funny, they weren't even close to as good as they were in 1997 or 1998. But the match against the McMahons, you know, this feud had been going on for a while. Shawn and Vince worked at WrestleMania that year, and I think the month after that, or whatever pay-per-view it was, they had the fucking Spirit Squad versus Shawn Michaels and God or some shit. Or maybe it was Vince and Shane versus Shawn Michaels and God, and they did that stupid fucking match. Was that Backlash? I mean, it was fucking retarded. So now Shawn has a real tag team partner, this time his buddy Triple H, and they beat the McMahons, you know, in an okay ending. Shawn super kicks Vince right into the pedigree, and they end up pinning him. And Shawn actually hit Shane McMahon with a super kick when Shane was trying to do the Van Terminator, or whatever the move is when he jumps from one rope to the other, you know, with the guy holding the trash can. So although I do find this SummerSlam interesting, was definitely not even close to any of my favorites at all. Now, can we all agree that 2007 sucked? Fuck me, this was a bad SummerSlam. Nothing interesting, nothing controversial, and nothing major happened at all, in my opinion. Just like last year, we have no title changes again. This time, the Great Khali is the world champion. Yes, you heard me correctly, don't adjust your audio. He's defending the title against Batista, and Batista gets the same shit pulled on him that he had the year before. Khali just purposely hits Batista with a chair, getting himself intentionally disqualified, and retains the World Heavyweight title. Now, for me personally, I don't remember what the fuck was going on back then, so you guys are going to have to fill me in what happened next. I'm pretty sure Batista would probably wind up winning the title later. Am I right about that? I don't know how much longer this feud went, but I know Khali didn't hold the title for that long, so I'm guessing maybe at the next pay-per-view they did a match with a stipulation where you can't get disqualified, something like that. I actually can't remember. And the WWE title saw no title change either. Guess what the main event was? Randy Orton versus John Cena. Of course, right? One of many pay-per-view matches they would have against each other. And I think Cena's dad was involved in this too. I mean, just like he was with Edge, I think Randy Orton, was this the feud where he punted Cena's father, or did that come at some other time? Because I know these guys feuded several times over the years, so my memory is hazy on that as well. But I think the feud was getting pretty personal, but they had a good match, typical match between the two. John Cena hit him with the FU and got the pin and retained the title to close out SummerSlam. Really not that great of a show. The undercard wasn't that much to look at either. No personal storylines coming out on TV, nothing like that. I think maybe the only interesting match we had was Rey Mysterio making his return against Chavo Guerrero. I didn't mention their match in 2006. They had a match, of course, this was shortly after Eddie Guerrero died. Vicky Guerrero had come into the company now and was getting involved in this. And then I think that feud continued around September or October when Rey Mysterio got injured and they ran the storyline on TV where Chavo injured his knee. It took him all this time to return, so SummerSlam 2007 was Rey Mysterio's first match since the year before. So he gets the rematch with Chavo at SummerSlam. In 2006, Chavo beat Rey. This year, Rey gets his revenge and beats Chavo, I think, with the 619 and the splash, and Rey is back. He was ironically painted completely silver in this. Rey Mysterio has worn some weird outfits over the years, but this one was really weird. He had silver trunks and a silver mask, and then he had no shirt on, but he painted his whole body silver. Rey and Jeff Hardy must have gone out to lunch together and got to talking. I don't know what was going on there. I also remember CM Punk and John Morrison having a terrible match for the ECW title, not liking that at all. And I think the only bright spot for me, one of my favorite wrestlers in the WWE at that time, was Umaga. I loved him, I loved the character, I loved his intensity, I loved his work in the ring. I really wish he would have been world champion over there. I wish they would have kept him around. I wish he wouldn't have died. I wish Umaga would have been a big star. One of my favorite Samoans ever. He had such a short run, but I was just such a fan of his work. I would love to see Umaga today get in the ring with fucking Rusev. Rusev will be eating a fucking Samoan spike, that's for sure. Umaga retained his Intercontinental title that night, beating Carlito and Mr. Kennedy. Triple H, was this the SummerSlam that he returned? Wasn't he gone with an injury and he faced Booker T, right? Now, Booker T, I think, was out of the WWE or on his way out of the WWE. I think this was one of, if not his last match before he headed off to TNA. And it was basically a squash match. I mean, Triple H was making his triumphant return, you know, the big return. It was not nearly as special as it was in 2002. This might have been the same injury. Was this when Triple H tore his other quad? I don't remember. But he was out for some time. He came back, returned in his match with Booker T, who's on his way out of the WWE, and completely fucking squashes him. So as a fan of Booker T, I really wasn't that thrilled to see that. And overall, just wasn't thrilled with this SummerSlam at all. This was not worth the money that we paid for it. And I bought it that year. I was really out of touch with the product. product, watching Raw, for an hour once a month and checking out the big pay-per-views. That's pretty much all I was doing. And when I sat down and watched this pay-per-view that night, I was reminded why I don't watch WWE too much, because I was disappointed with it. SummerSlam 2007, in my opinion, was terrible. SummerSlam 2008 was nothing special. Around this time, as you guys remember, the WWE was not treating either one of their world titles as their main event storyline. In this pay-per-view, neither title was the main event. Triple H was the WWE champion this year. He was taking on the Great Khali. Here's Khali back again in another big match. I actually forgot how much the WWE really used him. And you guys are going to have to help me out. My memory is so fuzzy when it comes to recent stuff, because around 2008, like I've mentioned many times, I wasn't paying that much attention. So I don't even know why Triple H and Khali were feuding to begin with, and I don't know how many matches before and after SummerSlam these guys had. I honestly don't remember. But Triple H ended up beating Khali with the pedigree, pinned him, and retained the WWE title. The World Heavyweight title was newly crowned champion CM Punk, who had cashed in his Money in the Bank, I believe, on Edge. He defended and retained the World Heavyweight title against JBL. And I recently reviewed CM Punk's DVD, and he talked a lot in the documentary about how this title reign really wasn't that big a deal. It was just on the back burner. It was almost like, giving CM Punk something to do, because the world title was not the main event on any card. It was never the featured storyline around this time. It almost seemed like it was a mid-card type of deal. So CM Punk himself was never really enamored with his world title run, but he still got a big victory at a big pay-per-view here at SummerSlam. Matt Hardy and Mark Henry also had a match for the ECW title, but the ECW title was such a joke. No titles changed hands at this pay-per-view, and that was the trend. That has been the trend in the last 3 or 4 years here in SummerSlam. I think 03 and 04 that we had title changes, but 05 and 06 and 07 there was nothing. So this is like the 4th SummerSlam in a row now. They haven't had any title changes. The 3 big matches on the card were, number 1, a Shawn Michaels retirement announcement. This was during that great Chris Jericho feud that he had. And he was basically going to come out at SummerSlam and announce his retirement. I didn't like this because you had Jericho and you had Shawn feuding. I just wish you could have figured out a way to have these guys have a match at SummerSlam instead of just a promo. But it was pretty good, and they added heat to the feud. And when Shawn Michaels announces that he's going to, quote, retire, Jericho comes out, starts talking trash. Long story short, winds up trying to punch Shawn. Shawn moves, and he hits his wife instead. And I think this, of course, leads Shawn to not retire and continue his feud with Jericho, and they would have matches at the next couple of pay-per-views. But as big a fan as I was of both guys and what they're capable of doing on the mic and their promo work and everything, I really wasn't that big a fan of this particular segment because, this is SummerSlam. You got to have something bigger than just a promo. The whole thing they did at SummerSlam, they could have done on Raw. And if they build Raw around Shawn Michaels' retirement and run this angle on Raw, that could be great for ratings. So I didn't think it needed to be done at SummerSlam. But either way, anytime Shawn and Jericho do anything together, the fans are going to win out. What I considered to be the biggest match, at least for the time, taking place on this pay-per-view was also not the main event, and that was Batista versus John Cena. They were billing this as the first time these guys have ever faced. Now, is that correct? They were both launched at WrestleMania 21 in 2005, 3 years before this, and I think they basically kept these two guys on opposite shows. Batista gets drafted to Raw, and now you got Cena and Batista on the same show, so naturally they're going to have a feud. This is a babyface match too, so the WWE kind of forced fans to choose, who they liked better, Batista or John Cena. These were the two guys that the WWE was considering, the top of their card. And I think fans were definitely sick of Cena by this point, but maybe not as sick of him as they are now. And I thought the match, considering who the two participants are, I'm not saying these two guys had as good a match as Kurt Angle and Eddie Guerrero, so fucking clean out your ears. I'm just saying, considering who these two guys are and both of their ring styles, I thought they put on a pretty decent match. And Batista won. Beat Cena with the Batista bomb at a big pay-per-view. It's not often you see Cena lose like that in a situation like this. And Cena would get his receipts in later years. I believe he even beat Batista at WrestleMania that year, remember? And Batista quit and all that. So, these guys' feud would continue on throughout the years, but this was the first time they faced, and Batista took the first match. And the main event is another one that baffles me. Edge versus The Undertaker in a Hell in the Cell. Great. Edge versus Taker, Hell in the Cell. That match can't be anything but good. But why is it the main event? I mean, it was SmackDown's top storyline. The stuff was pretty good that they were doing on TV, but why is that match qualified to be the main event over Cena and Batista and over both world titles? It's just strange to me going back and looking at it now. But anyway, Undertaker won, of course, the Hell in the Cell, tombstoning Edge at the end, and it was a pretty decent Hell in the Cell match, but still, just a little baffling why it was the main event. And like I said, around 2008, all of the storylines that were involved in this year's SummerSlam, I was not paying that much of attention. and I want to keep this commentary true to its form and keep these, mostly off the top of my head memories without having to look stuff up or relive anything. I just want to give you guys, my thoughts of what my feelings were on it at the time. So a lot of these feuds and storylines, I don't remember the details of, so you guys can fill me in on that in the comments section. If there's anything I'm leaving out of these last few SummerSlams, please feel free to let me know. 2009 got a little bit better. There was some crazy matches on this pay-per-view, and I remember the John Cena versus Randy Orton title match. This was when Randy Orton was champion on Raw. He was feuding again with John Cena. They had the SummerSlam match 2 years before this. And I believe this was when Randy Orton had the Legacy faction, and he was with Cody Rhodes and Ted DiBiase. Well, this match was full of all sorts of drama. It kind of reminded me of the Shawn Michaels Vader match from 1996, where they had several restarts. But Randy Orton basically was doing things throughout the match to get himself intentionally disqualified or counted out. I think once he was disqualified, the next he walked away from the ring and got himself counted out. Each time Vince McMahon restarted the match. Another time he pinned John Cena with his foot on the ropes. Referee runs out there and restarts the match again. You had like 3 restarts, and you even had a fan running into the ring attacking the referee, and I can't remember the storyline on that. I'm pretty sure that might have been Ted DiBiase's other son that they might have been thinking about adding to Legacy, because they also had that one Samoan guy and somebody else kind of maybe hanging around Legacy, and it never panned out. So finally, after the 3 restarts and the fan jumping in the ring, all the smoke clears. The match is still going on, and Randy Orton nails John Cena with a surprise RKO and winds up winning the match after all. It was actually quite a good story, because Randy Orton and John Cena, they had started to work a lot of pay-per-views together, and I think it was cool that the WWE, if they were going to give us Randy Orton and John Cena again, that they added another dynamic to the match. And I like the idea of all of the restarts. I mean, John Cena got fucked over like 4 times in the match, and on top of that, he lost clean to Batista the year before, so it's not like John Cena is winning every fucking time, but I did like, the shit that they pulled in the match, and I thought it added to a match that really needed something extra. I thought that would have been a great main event. I thought that would have been a great way to close out the show, with Randy Orton scoring the win like that, but the main event actually went to the SmackDown title. The main event went to CM Punk and Jeff Hardy in a ladder match. I loved this feud with Punk and Hardy. I mean, I'm glad those guys got to work one program together, because if they would have never worked together, all of us fans would be considering that a dream match. Oh, what would happen if CM Punk and Jeff Hardy faced each other? Jeff Hardy was on his way out of the WWE. I believe he had given his notice. He was World Heavyweight Champion. He went into SummerSlam and lost the title to CM Punk in the ladder match. After this, I believe they would have one more loser leaves town match. I think it was the cage match that knocked Jeff Hardy out of the WWE, and CM Punk retained the title. So they would have, I think, one more match after this. And I actually really liked what they did at the end of the match. I'll always remember this, because I ordered SummerSlam that year, and I think it was the one thing that I took away from this SummerSlam. After the match, when CM Punk is holding up the World Heavyweight title standing over Jeff Hardy's body, the lights go out, basically signifying CM Punk's next feud, which will be with The Undertaker. I believe they had a Hell in the Cell match a couple months after this. So the lights start to flicker, you hear the gong, and the lights go out. The lights come back on, CM Punk is still standing there holding the title. He's looking around, and he's like, where's The Undertaker? The Undertaker switched places with Jeff Hardy laying underneath CM Punk. And even watching it on TV, I did not notice The Undertaker laying there. I don't know if any of the fans noticed him laying there either. He's twice the size of Jeff Hardy, but you get Jeff Hardy out of there, you put Undertaker in his place laying in the ring, and nobody even sees him. And then he sits up and grabs CM Punk by the throat. It was just great shit. I've always liked the theatrics of The Undertaker and the mind games he plays. This was one of my favorites, because it was so subtle and so in your face, and you still didn't see it. It was like an illusion. Pretty cool shit. I enjoyed this SummerSlam a lot more than I did in the couple years prior to this. I thought the SummerSlams were just falling flat, were nothing special. This pay-per-view had some good spots, some good matches, some high drama. I loved what they did in the Cena and Orton match, and of course I loved the match between Jeff Hardy and CM Punk. This was a solid SummerSlam. DX had a match in this one too, right? I think DX had reformed again. They had a match with Legacy, or Cody Rhodes and Ted DiBiase. The great Khali and Kane also had a really slow, boring match, and Christian retained his ECW title by beating William Regal in like 2 seconds. So the card wasn't really that magnificent, but I think some of the things they did, like I said, made this a pretty solid SummerSlam. 2010 was a lukewarm SummerSlam at best, but the good news is GoodMicWork was born by this time. Just a couple of months before this SummerSlam was when I first started doing commentaries, and a lot of my old commentaries I have long since deleted. But I do remember coming up and addressing the outrage when Daniel Bryan was released, back when they did that angle with the Nexus and they attacked everybody and tore everything to shit, and he choked out Justin Roberts, and everybody is still so sensitive over the Chris Benoit stuff that WWE released the fucking guy. Now, I understood everybody's anger. Trust me, I did. But when I heard the story, I was like, well, you know, maybe they felt like they needed to do this. Maybe it's just something they need to do to let things blow over. I did not think it was that big a deal, and I was surprised that a good wrestler like that was released. But, you know, back then you didn't see the potential of Daniel Bryan. I never thought that Daniel Bryan in 2010 would do what he did at WrestleMania 30. So maybe the WWE felt that he was expendable, and just to avoid any potential negative heat coming in from the outside world and the media and shit, they thought it was best just to release him and make themselves look good. If Daniel Bryan would have been the level of star that he is today and something like that happened, of course he wouldn't be released. He wouldn't even be fined. He wouldn't even be talked to. So I understood, you know, the fans' anger. I think it got a little out of hand, though. People were wanting to bomb the WWE's headquarters over this. It was just fucking ridiculous, and I think I was coming up there telling everybody to chill the fuck out. Give it some time. This was one of those situations, just like with the Matt Hardy situation 5 years earlier. If you let time pass, you know, the WWE might bring him back. I think I said that the very day he was released. I said, you know what, he'll probably be back. And they did bring him back. He was John Cena's mystery partner. The main event was that big 7-on-7 match, Team WWE versus Team Nexus, and that whole storyline they did in the summer of 2010, I thought for the time wasn't bad because things just really sucked. We hadn't had the CM Punk pipe bomb yet, Brock Lesnar hadn't come back yet, The Rock hadn't even come back yet. So things were really sucking. So to see this new uprising of young, violent stars, I mean, they're out for blood every single week, they're looking to take over, you know, I thought was a pretty good storyline for the time. And it was the return of the greatest SummerSlam performer in WWE history. Bret the Hitman Hart actually was a participant in this match, and he got in the ring and beat the crap out of Heath Slater before getting disqualified for using a steel chair. And this match was slightly controversial as well. In the last few months, I think on Chris Jericho's podcast, he had Edge on, and they were talking about this match, and oh boy, did the Cena haters go crazy over this. Basically, what they were saying is they were just having a little bit of a disagreement with Cena about how the finish of the match should go. And I think a lot of what fans were misunderstanding is they're like, oh, see, Cena's exposed. And I listened to what Jericho and Edge said, and all they were saying is they were just discussing something that happens every single night at every single show from lots of different wrestlers. They themselves were talking about the same exact problems that they would do that Cena did this night. I mean, for fuck's sake, in the very same conversation that Edge and Jericho were having about this match at SummerSlam, they were saying how Edge wanted nothing to do with the first ever Money in the Bank. He didn't even want to be in the match. And he said, if that's the only plans you have for me, I want you to leave me off WrestleMania. And Edge was booked to win this fucking thing, okay? So a lot of times you don't see things, you know, hindsight's 20/20. And so they weren't burying John. They weren't saying that he was fucking stupid. They just said that he wasn't understanding something. They were trying to tell him to do it a different way. He was adamant and stubborn that it goes the way he wanted. And then after the match, he went up to him and said, hey, you know what? You're right. I should have listened to you. But of course, the Cena haters make a mountain out of a molehill. And this example that Jericho and Edge were talking about with Cena, this happens all the time. They weren't arguing with Cena about who won. They were arguing about how the finish went down. When they said they were pushing for Wade Barrett to win, they were pushing that with management, not with Cena. Cena's not the booker. What they were trying to figure out with Cena is how they planned the finish of the match. And looking back on it, I agree too. You know, if they wanted to make the Nexus so huge and they wanted to make Wade Barrett a big star, you know, this was the match that they needed to win. It wouldn't have hurt John Cena at all to lose or get pinned or submit in a match that's 7-on-7. It's not like it's 1-on-1. It's not like it's for the title or anything like that. And it would have been a really nice feather in the cap for Nexus. So I agree that in that match and in that situation, Nexus should have won. But that does not mean that John Cena is the cause of everything. That's WWE creative. That's the fucking agents. That's the bookers. That's Vince. That's everybody. They should have collectively come together and said, we need to put this group of Nexus over. We are building them. We're investing time in them. We're investing money in them. We're investing a lot in them. So they need to win a big match. It's the management's fault, not John Cena. How the finish of the match went, then you can blame that on Cena if you want. But at the end of the day, that's not that big a deal, and that's something that happens regularly amongst all wrestlers. I bet Daniel Bryan has even been stubborn about doing something here or there, and a lot of times you make a mistake, and when you look back on it, you say to yourself, yep, I was wrong. And that's exactly what John Cena did. If you ask me, you know, Jericho and Edge didn't expose Cena for being the douchebag that he is. They exposed Cena for being a human being. And after he realized he was wrong, he came out and said so. So it's one of those situations where I just love that the haters will jump on any little thing. You know, that was such a minor story. What Edge and Jericho were talking about, that was so not a big deal. That was just a little minor disagreement over how a finish of a match should go. If you're pissed off who won, then you need to call Vince McMahon and bitch to him about that. But John Cena's not the booker. He's the wrestler, and that's what he went out and did. What else happened on this pay-per-view? Not much. The world title matches were Sheamus and Randy Orton, I believe. Sheamus was a heel and the champion, and I don't even remember the finish, and I'm not even going to look it up because I don't care, but I do think Sheamus left that night with the title. And I remember Kane and Rey Mysterio having something going on with The Undertaker involved. Undertaker got injured and got taken out of a match or something. So this was when Kane was World Heavyweight Champion, defended the title against Rey at SummerSlam and won. Also retaining his title, and here we have yet another SummerSlam where all the belts just stay put. Only 3 left. Sweet. I'm getting excited. We're almost done. SummerSlam 2011, things really picked back up. I enjoyed this SummerSlam. I really did. I really liked the main event, and I liked everything surrounding it. This was the summer of Punk, or the second one he had in the WWE. The first one came, that great summer of 05 when he left Ring of Honor, but this was right after the pipe bomb. CM Punk came out on Raw. He was about to leave. His contract was up. We all know the story. He cut the pipe bomb on Raw. I was out of town or something at the time, and I remember, my Facebook and Twitter, exploding over this. People were freaking out. You got to hear what Punk said. You got to comment on it. People were losing it, and it was a great night, and it was awesome for CM Punk, and it really brought some excitement back to the WWE because WrestleMania 27 was the shits. The Rock made his return to the WWE, but only to host the show and then to interfere in the horrible main event between The Miz and John Cena. And The Miz, the guy that I defended a time or two back then because I was saying, hey, let the WWE try new things. Let them push new guys. That's what you guys want. They're pushing The Miz. You may not like him, but that's who they're pushing. They're pushing Sheamus too, so shut the fuck up and accept it. But looking back, Miz is terrible. I can't stand The Miz. Fucking douchebag. And I think the WWE realized that it wasn't going to work like that. And so when they had CM Punk, cut that promo and they convinced him to stay and re-sign his contract because that would have been the last thing they needed. After WrestleMania 27 and after how that show kind of fell flat and The Rock really not going to be coming back in until the next year, to lose a big star like that was really going to hurt. So instead of losing a semi-main eventer, they gained a main eventer. And this whole situation and this whole promo and this whole contract, negotiations that were going on between Punk and the WWE turned into their top storyline and really set the wrestling world on fire. So fast forward to SummerSlam 2011, you have the promo, you have the Money in the Bank match where CM Punk wins the WWE title and leaves the WWE. The WWE, I think, then runs the tournament that John Cena wins after defeating Rey Mysterio, and John Cena is the new champion, and then CM Punk returns to Raw because he is the true WWE champion, and you have the face-off between the two guys, each holding up a WWE title belt. So the match at SummerSlam is basically champion versus champion. It's the real WWE champion CM Punk versus the interim WWE champion John Cena, and Triple H will be the guest referee because I guess he's the only one that can maintain order in this thing. The match wasn't to me nearly as good as the match they had at Money in the Bank, but still good for Cena and Punk. You know what to expect from those guys, and those guys still, I think, did fine, but their Money in the Bank match was much better. But it's the ending and the finish and the surprises and the swerves that I really like. First of all, Punk beats John Cena with his foot on the rope, 1, 2, 3, Triple H doesn't see it. CM Punk becomes the undisputed WWE champion. John Cena is pissed off at Triple H for missing his foot on the rope and not calling it right because he's an inexperienced referee. John and Triple H are walking to the back arguing with each other, and then out of nowhere, out comes Kevin Nash, of all people. Attacks CM Punk from behind, hits him with the jackknife, and runs through the crowd and just leaves. And then who comes out? The current Money in the Bank briefcase holder, Alberto Del Rio. The fans go fucking nuts. Comes into the ring with a referee, cashes in the briefcase, hits CM Punk with his finisher, and wins the WWE title. Fucking unbelievable swerve. Now, I remember being a little bit disappointed that they took the belt off of Punk because I'm like, this guy is the hottest guy in wrestling right now. You need to have him run with the title, and he would have a lengthy run. We just had to be patient, and he would get his revenge against Alberto Del Rio at Survivor Series. But having Del Rio win the title cleared up room for CM Punk to have a feud with Triple H and Kevin Nash. I think Nash and Punk were supposed to work originally, and then they did not. CM Punk wound up working with Triple H instead, I think at Night of Champions, and then I forget what he did at the month after that, but it was Survivor Series that he got the title shot against Del Rio, won the title in Madison Square Garden. Howard Finkel announced him to the ring. It was awesome. You know what else was awesome about this pay-per-view? Randy Orton and Christian. These guys, I think, during the summer of 2011 were having some of the best matches that I had seen during that time in the WWE. That was great shit. They worked a couple of pay-per-views. They worked a couple of SmackDowns. The matches were good. I mean, if you just like good psychology, good storytelling, just good professional wrestling, those two guys gave it to you. I don't know why everybody says, oh, Randy Orton's boring. Fuck you. Those were great matches. Go back and watch them. If you can't see the good or the beauty in the series of matches that those two guys had, then you're too filled with smark hate to see reality. Those were great, and the SummerSlam match was awesome. It was no-holds-barred match, anything goes, a great finish with an RKO on the steps to Christian. You know, Randy Orton pins him, wins the World Heavyweight title. Fucking awesome. Nothing else really noteworthy took place on this SummerSlam, although I do remember the Mark Henry and Sheamus match, and there was the great bump that they took on the outside of the ring. Mark Henry basically tackled or slammed Sheamus right through the barricade. And even though we see barricade bumps all the time, this one was especially violent looking. The crowd freaked out, and it was a count-out victory. Mark Henry got in the ring and just stood there, and Sheamus crawled to the ring and just couldn't quite make it there by the 10 count. And I actually thought it was one of the more entertaining count-out finishes that I had ever seen. A whole year had gone by now since the 7-on-7 WWE versus Nexus match, and they had the former leader of Nexus, Wade Barrett, take on Daniel Bryan, who's now been back in the company for a solid year. They looked like they were still trying to push Barrett because Barrett got the clean win over D-Bry, and, they were still trying to make Barrett and really didn't have any plans for Daniel Bryan. So, considering what year it is now and what we went through at WrestleMania 30, looking back at this, and just seeing Daniel Bryan just lose a middle-of-the-card match with not much crowd reaction was pretty funny now, considering how over the guy is. Even when he's sitting at home with an injury, he's fucking over. SummerSlam 2012 was the Beast versus the Game. Triple H and Brock Lesnar headlined this SummerSlam. You can check out my channel and go back to the summer of 2012 if you want to hear my thoughts at the time of this SummerSlam match before and after the pay-per-view. I'm sure I have a predictions and a results video from that SummerSlam a couple years ago, so if you want to go back and take a listen to it, feel free, and I'll actually put some links up on the screen as well. I thought the match was good. I had no problem with Brock and Triple H. Those were two megastars. I thought that was a pretty good feud to have. It was wrapped up in a lot of other stuff. Shawn Michaels got involved, and Brock Lesnar not only broke Triple H's arm before SummerSlam, but he broke Shawn Michaels' arm during a promo on Raw as well. So Brock Lesnar was in full-on kick-ass mode. He had already lost to John Cena when he first came back at Extreme Rules, so he was due for a big victory. So to me, the finish of this match was 100% crystal clear. They weren't going to bring Brock in, pay him all this money, give him this cushy contract and this easy schedule, and then have him lose to John Cena, then lose to Triple H. He's not going to come in and just keep losing. And I'm sure I said a lot of these same words when this match was taking place 2 years ago, but I really felt that it was obvious that Brock Lesnar had to win this match. And the match was good. I mean, for two big, beefy guys like that, 260, 300-pounders, I thought they put on a pretty good match. Triple H is a great technician. He's got great ring psychology. He knows what he's doing. He's awesome in the ring. He's a technician. And Brock Lesnar, of course, is no Funaki. He's the fucking man in there. So the match was awesome. Very, very intense match. And Brock won with a submission. Broke Triple H's arm a second time. So I was completely fine with the match. I was completely fine with the finish. I was completely fine with it being the main event. What I was not completely fine with is that Triple H and Brock Lesnar would have 2 more matches. To me, having Brock Lesnar come in so infrequently the way he does is a treat, and I don't want to see him wrestle the same guy over and over. But the first match they had at SummerSlam I thought was great. The 2 title matches saw WWE Champion Sheamus retaining the title, defending it against Alberto Del Rio, and CM Punk was well into his title reign. He had already held this thing for about 8 or 9 months. He had recently turned heel, turning on The Rock in Raw's 100th episode. Remember that? He was going to defend the WWE title against John Cena and The Big Show in a triple threat. And excuse me as I say that, I just referred earlier to Sheamus as the WWE champion. He was not. He was the World Heavyweight champion. Punk is the WWE champion, and he retains his title, of course, in the triple threat match against Cena and Big Show, and would continue his reign for another, 6 months. I actually kind of like the finish. John Cena hit the Big Show with the AA, and then CM Punk just came in from behind, tossed Cena out of the ring, and jumped on the Big Show and pinned him. It was awesome. I loved CM Punk's title run. I loved him as a heel. It was great. And Daniel Bryan and Kane also had a match on this show. It's funny. This was when Daniel Bryan first started getting over. He had just started growing the beard a little bit. He was involved with all of that shit with Kane. They eventually became a tag team, and then you remember the therapy sessions and the hugging it out, and, that would last for, more months to come. But it was cool to see Daniel Bryan steal a victory, against Kane, beating a big monster like that. That was one of his biggest wins that he had had. And it was cool to see Daniel Bryan beat Kane. It was a pretty big win for him at a big pay-per-view. He was World Heavyweight Champion earlier in the year. He lost at WrestleMania to, 10 seconds or something like that to Sheamus. So Daniel Bryan around SummerSlam time was starting to get back on track, and then, of course, we know where his career would lead. But I think that's all I'm going to say about 2012. It's really recent. If you want to hear all of my thoughts about it, like I said, go back and listen to my previous commentaries. Last one. We've made it to the end. For those of you who have been sitting through this the whole time, I want to say thank you. What's the runtime on this now? I know we're hovering somewhere around 3.5 hours, give or take. So those of you who sat through and listened to all of my SummerSlam memories from the bottom of my heart, thank you for being such awesome, diehard fans. You guys don't know how kick-ass you are. We got to talk about the main event first. Just like 2012, if you want to hear what I had to say about this SummerSlam as it happened, I'll put links up on the screen to my before and after commentaries where you can hear me predict this thing and then go through the results and all of that. And there was a lot that went down in the main event. We all remember what happened last year. Daniel Bryan flat out got the title shot. He was so fucking over that they just ran the promo on Raw where John Cena got to pick his own opponent. He said, I want to give it to the guy that's the most popular superstar in the company right now, Daniel Bryan. John Cena, as we all remember, had the elbow injury, so it was perfect. He was going to have to take time off anyway. He was going to have to drop the belt to somebody, and to have Daniel Bryan versus John Cena, a babyface match one-on-one in the main event of SummerSlam, was going to be great. CM Punk and John Cena had good matches, so Daniel Bryan and John Cena will damn sure be able to have good matches, and Triple H made himself the referee. You could tell this was all fishy, again, just like a couple years prior when he reffed the Cena and Punk match. You just knew that something wasn't right. And Randy Orton had recently won the Money in the Bank. Everybody was calling this. They were saying Randy Orton's going to come out and cash it in. And I wasn't even that sure about it. I was the one saying, he just won it. Give it some time. They might actually be giving Daniel Bryan this moment. We didn't have the foresight to see that Daniel Bryan, holding it off was the best thing for him. And he had his big moment at WrestleMania 30. So you knew something was up. And as the events of the main event started unfolding, I remember being able to see it coming. Once Daniel Bryan won, he won with the running knee, I think, to John Cena, or you guys can correct me. I don't even remember how he won, but I know that he pinned John Cena, and then when he's celebrating with the title with Triple H, Randy Orton's music hits, and then Triple H turns on Daniel Bryan, hitting him with the pedigree, allowing Randy Orton to cash in and beat Daniel Bryan for the title. Fans were outraged last year. I just remember the anger. To me, I didn't mind. I liked the surprise. I liked the swerve, just like I did a couple years ago. I wasn't thrilled that CM Punk, was going to not be the WWE champion, but I loved the ending with Kevin Nash and Alberto Del Rio, and I loved it because I didn't see it coming. This year, we kind of saw it coming, but it was still pretty shocking because he basically had a double turn. Triple H wasn't full-on heel yet, and he turned on Daniel Bryan, and Randy Orton was a face, so he turned heel as well. And then John Cena, of course, was going to be taking a couple of months off to have elbow surgery, so a lot happened. And then, of course, that subsequently led to Daniel Bryan getting the multiple rematches, Night of Champions, and whatever the fuck else after that, falling short, the Authority just completely fucking over Daniel Bryan all the way through the beginning of the year, through the Royal Rumble, through Elimination Chamber, and then finally, at WrestleMania 30, Bryan gets his big moment. But this whole SummerSlam match started it all. Looking back now, a year later, I have no problem with the way they set that whole thing up. Randy Orton needed to reemerge. The WWE needed another top guy, and Randy Orton was kind of set aside for a while because he had some wellness policy violations. He was doing jobs on Raw, just random jobs to random guys. They were not doing a whole heck of a lot with Randy Orton. But the guy has a great legacy. He was one of the faces of the WWE. So once the WWE redeveloped the trust in Randy Orton, they re-elevated him to the position that he had before he got in all that trouble. And I think it was the right thing to do. Like it or not, you got to have Randy Orton around. He's a 10 or 11-time world champion? Maybe even more than that. He's right on the heels of John Cena, who's right on the heels of Ric Flair. So Randy Orton has developed himself a huge legacy in the WWE. It amazes me how many fans hate an athletic third-generation star. It blows my mind. But I don't hate Randy Orton. Can he be boring at times? Sure. But that's the WWE putting him on TV 600 times a week. Blame them. But Randy Orton himself is a good-looking, big, athletic wrestler whose father and grandfather wrestled. There is nothing at all wrong with that. And a guy like Randy Orton is not a cancer to the business, you idiots. But I know the theme of my commentaries last year was for everybody to relax and just be patient. Wrestling fans, especially the smarks, have no patience. It doesn't exist. They want instant gratification, and they want that gratification yesterday. They are not willing to wait for anything at all. And I remember people being really pissed off. And if you were one of those people, look back to back then. Don't you think what they did wound up being the right way to go? Wasn't all that anger and all that outrage for no fucking reason because Daniel Bryan got the greatest moment that any wrestler could ever hope for at WrestleMania 30, So people just need to calm down, basically. And that was the biggest story of last year's SummerSlam. But my favorite match on the card was CM Punk and Brock Lesnar. I loved that match. I love that opponent for Brock Lesnar. I was so sick and tired of seeing him wrestle like Triple H and Cena and guys his size. Here you have somebody that is smaller and will be a different opponent for him and can bump around a little bit better and can add a lot of dynamics to the match. And I thought the match was great. CM Punk held his own. You know, when I first saw this feud start and Brock Lesnar confronted CM Punk and hit him with the F5 on Raw, I was like, oh shit. You know, this thing isn't going to be close. This isn't going to be any sort of a fight. Brock Lesnar's twice the size of CM Punk. He's going to demolish him. Plus, he's a legitimate fighter. CM Punk's not a legitimate fighter, but Punk put up a great fight. It was a great match. And ultimately, at the end, Brock Lesnar won, which is fine. He should have won. I'm almost wondering, you know, like they did the year before with Triple H, had CM Punk not left the WWE, I wouldn't be surprised at all if we saw Punk and Lesnar again. I'm not sure if Brock would have beat the streak if Punk would have left. He might have got the rematch with Punk at WrestleMania instead of facing The Undertaker. Or maybe they could do Punk and Lesnar Part 2 at this year's SummerSlam. But at the time, I was thinking for as good of a fight as CM Punk put up, that someday in the future, you know, we would see these two guys in the ring again. But we're not going to see it this year because Punk is out of the WWE and Lesnar will be working with Cena. What was the other title match last year? It was Del Rio versus Christian, right? Del Rio was World Heavyweight Champion. I think he would hold that title all the way until John Cena returned and beat him for it when he came back early from yet another injury. And this was Bray Wyatt's debut, too. Was that the opening match, the Inferno match, or whatever he had with Kane? So this was basically the debut on TV of the Wyatt family. And I think they did the finish. It actually wasn't very well done. They did something to basically get the Wyatt family in the ring, the Flames. It's not like an old school Inferno match where you have to set your opponent on fire. This is PG, so I think the Flames were just there to keep the other members of the Wyatt family out of the ring. But they threw like a tarp or a blanket over top of the Flames or something like that, got in there. The three of them beat the shit out of Kane, and then Wyatt hit Sister Abigail for the victory. So it was cool to see Bray Wyatt debut. It was cool to see him get a big victory, but the whole Inferno match I think was unnecessary. They could have just had a straight up match. It didn't do much for me, and I really didn't enjoy Bray Wyatt's debut. I've liked a lot more matches he's had since then, a lot more than his first match. And I think the flames surrounding the ring was completely unnecessary. I'm done. Wow. Finally fucking finished. I really underestimated how long that this commentary was going to be. Here I thought I could touch on every single show in about an hour, and it would take me 4 days to do it, but instead it took me 3 hours and 3 weeks to do it. So I hope you enjoyed it. It was a lot of fun. I liked doing it this way. Let me know your response to this video. What did you think about this idea? Did I talk about enough stuff? Did I leave anything out? What did I forget? And like I said, if this video gets a good response, I will probably do this for Survivor Series or Royal Rumble or WrestleMania or all three. I'm just not sure yet, but I will definitely do something like this again for the next major pay-per-view that comes up. So if you'd like to see me do one of these for Royal Rumble or Survivor Series, let me know, and I'm definitely going to try to do one for WrestleMania next year. And I really appreciate you guys listening to this and taking this trip down memory lane. For me, it's very fun to go back and relive some of these moments and these memories, and I thought it was cool the way we went through every single show. And I think we all have a really good idea of the legacy of SummerSlam and how far back it goes. Listen to what I said about 2013 and then go back and listen to what I said about 1998. The business has really evolved, and things can change so dramatically as each year goes by. We went through several different eras. You know, we went through rock and wrestling. We went through the mid-90s. We went through Attitude Era. We went through Ruthless Aggression. We went through PG. These SummerSlams span them all. And it was a lot of fun to revisit these shows and take a look back. And I hope you guys enjoyed it. So I won't keep you any longer. You've been listening to my voice long enough. So you guys take care of yourselves. Enjoy the rest of your summer and enjoy SummerSlam 2014 if you are listening to this before the pay-per-view comes up. And once again, thank you for the support. I appreciate everybody that sits down and listens to me talk about wrestling. You don't know how flattering it is. I appreciate everybody that is a fan of my work. And I hope you continue to listen to me for years to come. I will talk to you very, very soon. Until next time, peace.